it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us. We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing! You see, amazing!
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
It's 12 o'clock. Very good afternoon to you. This is GB News Live. Here's what's coming up for you today. He's back. Yes, Prince Harry, with more allegations against his family, this time alleging Prince William pushed him to the floor after a dispute in Kensington Palace. We'll be getting the latest from our royal reporter on the saga of Meghan and Harry. Sir Keir Starmer has promised to end sticking plaster politics in his first major speech of 2023. He pledged to let local areas across the country take back control of their areas, saying that power had become too centralised within Westminster, saying Labour would change government to make sure it truly represented the interests of working people. And it's been dubbed Tragic Thursday as trains remain at a standstill after 3 days of national strike action. Yesterday, during his speech, the PM barely mentioned the strikes, but rumours are circulating that he may be preparing legislation in order to combat the constant strike action. If you've got a view on any of that or anything else you want to talk about this afternoon, then do get in touch. I'd love to hear from you. gbviews@gbnews.uk. First, let's have a look at the latest news headlines.
Good afternoon, it's just gone 12 o'clock. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB Newsroom. Sir Keir Starmer's promised a decade of national renewal if Labour comes to power. In his first speech of the new year, the Labour leader pledged an end to sticking plaster politics in Westminster. He also set out plans to modernise central government. Conservative Party chairman Nadine Zahawi has called the speech yet another desperate relaunch attempt. Sir Keir says the Prime Minister doesn't have the solutions to the country's problems.
You saw it yesterday from the Prime Minister. Commentary without solution. More promises, more platitudes. No ambition to take us forward. No sense of what the country needs. 13 years of nothing but sticking plaster politics. It's why every crisis hits Britain harder than our competitors. The only country in the G7 still poorer than it was before the pandemic. The worst decade for growth in 2 centuries. 7 million on waiting lists and rising.
Prince Harry reportedly claims he was attacked by his brother over his marriage to Meghan Markle in his autobiography Spare. A leaked extract published in The Guardian alleges Prince William grabbed Harry by the collar and knocked him to the floor in 2019, leaving him with a visible injury to his back. Harry also claims William called the American actress difficult, rude and abrasive. Buckingham Palace has declined to comment. Up to 60,000 mourners are thought to have gathered in St Peter's Square at the Vatican for the funeral of former Pope Benedict XVI. The Mass this morning was led by Pope Francis. It's the first time in 600 years that the current Pope has buried his predecessor. Benedict XVI will be buried in the crypt beneath St Peter's Basilica, according to his wishes. And some news just in. The government's decided it won't go ahead with a plan to privatise Channel 4. The idea to sell the broadcaster was announced during Boris Johnson's government. Former Culture Secretary Nadine Dorries had said the government ownership was holding the channel back. But her successor, Michelle Donnellan, has decided the broadcaster shouldn't be sold. She instead proposes other reforms, including greater commercial flexibility. It's the third consecutive day of rail disruption across the UK, and it's even worse today as drivers begin a new strike. Some areas have no trains at all, forcing travellers to find alternative routes as members of ASLEF walk out. Train drivers at 15 different companies are now on strike, affecting Avanti, West Coast, TransPennine Express and cross-country services. Mick Whelan's the General Secretary of ASLEF. He told us union members won't back down.
I'm always hopeful, but the longer it goes on, the problems get greater. When we first started talking, inflation was 5.2%. It went to 14% last year. So 14% last year and in double digits this year. Effectively, over the 4 years, my members have seen a 25% cut in their living standards, as have many other workers. How long can that go on for?
A British tourist has been shot dead in Jamaica in what police there think may have been a contract killing ordered in the UK. 33-year-old Sean Patterson from West London was shot multiple times by the pool of his holiday villa in St James. The personal trainer was on his first visit to the island to meet his father. Jamaican police say one man's been taken into custody as they continue to work on the case with UK authorities. Back here, new car sales have sunk to their lowest level in 30 years. Preliminary data shows that around 1.6 million were registered here in the UK in 2022, a quarter below pre-COVID levels. Supply shortages of items such as semiconductors are being blamed, driven by coronavirus lockdowns in China. Electric cars, though, made up 23% of all newly registered vehicles. Republicans have failed to elect a leader in the House of Representatives for the second day in a row. 20 party members are defying former President Donald Trump's wish to unite behind Kevin McCarthy for leader of the House. Mr. McCarthy's failed 6 times to secure the 218 ballots needed for him to win. The voting will continue later. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now, though, it's back to Stephen.
Rhiannon, thank you. 6 minutes past 12. Now, Prince Harry reportedly claims in his autobiography Spare that he was physically attacked by his brother over his marriage to Meghan Markle. In a leaked extract published in The Guardian today, it alleges Prince William grabbed the Duke of Sussex by the collar and knocked him to the floor in 2019, which left him with a visible mark on his back. Harry also claimed William called the American actress difficult, rude and abrasive. So far, Buckingham Palace has declined to comment. Well, a new trailer for Prince Harry's latest interview has also dropped in the last few hours. Let's have a look.
I don't know how staying silent is ever going to make things better.
Wouldn't your brother say to you, Harry, how could you do this to me? After everything we went through, wouldn't that be what he would say?
He'd probably say all sorts of different things.
Some people will say, you have railed against invasions of your privacy all your life. But the accusation will be, here are you invading the privacy of your most nearest and dearest without permission. That'll be the accusation.
That would be the accusation from the people that don't understand or don't want to believe that my family have been briefing the press.
If you're invited to the coronation, will you come?
There's a lot that can happen between now and then. But you know, the door is always open. The ball is in their court. There's a lot to be discussed, and I really hope that they are willing to sit down and talk about it.
Do you still believe in the monarchy?
Yes.
Do you believe you'll play a part in its future?
I don't know.
Now let's talk to our Raw reporter, Cameron Walker, who's here in the studio. Afternoon, Cameron. You've got some breaking news on this.
Yeah, a lot to unpack there. We'll go into that in a bit more detail later. However, we have just found out that in Spain, of course, Spare, Prince Harry's memoir, is being published in 16 different languages, have accidentally put it on sale 5 days early. So if you are in Spain, you can, it would appear, buy Prince Harry's memoir in Spanish bookshops. Presumably, they are trying to recall said books, but I know that The Sun is claiming that they have managed to get a copy of it, so stand by for perhaps more bombshells coming from that direction. But clearly, this comes when we were told yesterday that there was so much security surrounding the publication of this book. It was likened to the final Harry Potter book being published back in 2007 under lock and key satellite tracking devices on trucks. So this is a huge security breach for Penguin Random House.
Yeah, isn't it just? Look, on what we know so far then, according to the leak that The Guardian's got hold of, there's all this hoo-ha over saying, you know, his brother William, our future king, was sort of violent towards him. They had a scuffle, didn't they? I mean, it might not be very nice, but they are brothers. These things do happen.
They do happen, and I'm sure there are many families where similar incidents have happened. I think the problem for Prince William and the palace, to some extent, is that what would usually happen in private is now being aired very much in public. And, of course, Prince William is now Prince of Wales. He is heir to the throne. And having the heir to the throne's brother publicly claim that he was physically attacked by the then Duke of Cambridge isn't going to go down particularly too well. Prince Harry claims he was pushed to the ground, he hit the dog bowl, which smashed, which caused injuries to his back. And it all was a scuffle, an argument around Meghan, Duchess of Sussex, when they were living in Nottingham Cottage. It's just not a very good look, but it almost cheapens the monarchy to some extent because it sounds like a soap opera rather than the royal family.
Doesn't it just? Though I have to say, the fact... It's also claimed William said that Meghan was difficult, rude and abrasive. Well,
I haven't heard that before.
Well, I'm going to say it doesn't come as much of a surprise, does it?
Well, we've heard several claims that Meghan is like that. Clearly, we don't know as facts because none of us know her personally. But clearly, Prince Harry is saying that that's what William thought himself. So you can see how this scuffle occurred. But I think this perhaps is just going to be one incident involving the two brothers' fallout. And at the bottom of the extracts in The Guardian, in fact, there's a separate extract which The Guardian has published talking about following Prince Philip's funeral. And Prince Charles had to stand between William and Harry, who were very much arguing, red-faced. And he said, please, boys, you know, don't argue, don't make my final years a misery, is what he said. So, which is really sad, actually, because I think it just shows this loving father who's literally just buried his own father, having to deal with his two sons fighting.
What seems difficult in all of this, in the clip we just heard, and we've heard it before, to be fair, Harry saying, well, I want to reconcile, the ball is in their court. Well, that's not strictly true, is it? I mean, it seems like this has got to come from both sides, hasn't it? And it doesn't seem to be. With these revelations coming out, that's hardly going to help.
Yeah, this is the big problem. We're only getting Prince Harry's version of the truth. Buckingham Palace and Kensington Palace, Kensington Palace looks after Prince William's office, is remaining very tight-lipped. They are not commenting on any of the leaks, any of the book, any of the claims, which clearly presents a problem to us, because we're only getting one side of the story, and trying to balance it is proving quite difficult. But I think the Palace's strategy of never complain, never explain is working. You just have to look at the latest YouGov poll, which came out just before the Netflix docu-series aired, which showed that Harry and Meghan's popularity had plummeted, really. It was very much downhill. They still remain the least popular royals amongst the British public, apart from Prince Andrew. The rest of the royal family are still more popular with the British public.
I mean, the never explain, never complain thing. I mean, it's like the old adage, isn't it, that, you know, today's headlines are tomorrow's chip paper. And you sort of get the sense if the royals can ride this out, then it will, in effect, as far as the British public are concerned, just go away.
It allows Buckingham Palace and Kensington Palace, the royal household, to focus on their engagements and, you know, the charity work that really matters to them, and try and ignore all this noise which is coming from across the Atlantic. But on the other hand, that it is only, you know, one side of the story that we're getting, and presumably their bargaining chip is that the British public are going to stick with the Buckingham Palace and being on the side of Buckingham Palace. If opinion polls start to sway more into Harry and Meghan's favour, perhaps they'll rethink. But for now, it looks like they're going to be sticking with the no comments line.
Yeah, OK. Cameron, thanks very much indeed. Catch up with you a little bit later on. I'm sure you've got a view about that. GBViews at gbnews.uk if you have. Now, a little earlier today, the Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, set out his political vision for Britain, saying 2023 would mark a new chapter for the country and that it needs change and national renewal. He also sought to distance himself from Jeremy Corbyn, highlighting changes have been made under his watch, including on NATO, national security and anti-Semitism. So let's have a listen to some of the key moments from his speech.
I hope to flourish. Britain needs change. And I don't think anyone seriously disputes that. It's the story of the country right now. Amidst all the chaos is a growing impatience for change, for real change, lasting change, national renewal. And yes, as they've done throughout our history, the British people are turning to Labour to provide that change. 2022, they looked at us again, and I felt, for the first time in a while, we could return their gaze with confidence. That the changes we've made on anti-Semitism, on national security and NATO, on making economic stability the platform for everything we do, has restored a degree of trust, laid a foundation. And this year, we've got to build on that. People know we care. They always know the Labour Party cares. And they can now see a party that is both competent and compassionate. A party that understands what it means to put service to the country first. We can feel the public looking at us again, and we won't let up. We'll work every day to earn their trust, show them a new way of governing, and lead them to the fairer, greener, more dynamic Britain where aspiration is rewarded, working people succeed, communities control their own destiny, and where politics doesn't hide from the big challenges that face our children. Thank you very much.
Oh, what do you make of it? Well, let's see what our political reporter, Olivia Utley, thinks. Good to see you, Olivia. It sounds great on the surface. I mean, is anyone just listening in, you've got to say, well, it all sounds great, sounds aspirational. Is there anything of substance there?
Well, yeah, he definitely sounded more statesmanlike than the Starmer that we've seen before, and he had quite a lot of energy. I mean, quite a lot of it was pretty constructed energy with sleeves rolled up and everything, but he definitely put across the image of a Prime Minister in waiting. As for substance, the headline really was this Take Back Control bill, which amounts to essentially more devolution. He talks about a completely new way of doing politics, taking power away from Westminster. There's nothing really new in that. He trailed it a few months ago. It's basically more devolution, more power to regional communities. In tone, he was very different from Jeremy Corbyn, and there actually is some sort of substance there as well, because he talks about patriotic pride, he talks about helping people get up, helping them do what they want to do, ambition, all very different messages from what we saw from Jeremy Corbyn. Then on to the sort of the nitty-gritty of his policies. In terms of what he avoided, the striking omission to me, and I think many other people watching, was what he'd do about the small boats crisis. We know that this is one of the biggest problems facing Britain in 2023, and he has said again and again that he'll tackle the problem upstream. Well, that's all very well. Make a deal with the French, yes, but it's very hard to do. He didn't actually say what he would do with the migrants who were coming here on the small boats. So in terms of that, it did seem a little bit weaker than what Rishi Sunak said. On the other hand, the big strength, as far as I could see it, was this sticking plaster politics, line, which I think will really resonate with people, because his point about energy was, I mean, spot on. He talks about how Tories didn't invest in nuclear, didn't invest in offshore wind, and that's why we're in the crisis that we're in at the moment. That analysis is right, and I think the way he packaged it up as sticking plaster solutions makes quite a lot of sense. Few other little nuggets which were quite interesting of substance. He didn't, when pressed by the Times on whether he would abolish student fees, he didn't say yes. That was one of the pledges in his own leadership campaign. So there'll be plenty of people in Labour who feel that as a betrayal. There are lots of young Labour members who feel very passionately about this. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. He also said that he'd repeal any legislation that Rishi Sunak brought forward to curtail strikers' rights.
Right.
He did it quite cleverly. He said that it wouldn't work, rather than he doesn't support the strikers. So it's still sort of fence-sitting, but that's quite interesting as well.
Yeah, he's sort of juggling a lot of balls, isn't he, and trying to get them all to land in the right place. But on a lot of the key issues, it strikes me, and I don't know if you would agree, that there doesn't seem to be, in a sense, that much clear water between him and Rishi Sunak.
Absolutely. They both have sort of diagnosed the problems facing the country. And although Starmer there talked about Rishi Sunak putting forward only platitudes, it was quite hard to see what of substance was different. The other thing which I think is very difficult for Keir Starmer, and he knows this, we found out that Labour was very worried about this days after Rishi Sunak came into power, is that tonally, they're pretty similar. Temperamentally, they're pretty similar. They both talk about competence, safe pair of hands, about trust, about delivering what they promise. They both have a bit of a problem as speakers, coming across a bit wooden, a bit robotic. And whereas with Liz Truss and Boris Johnson, Keir Starmer could sort of say, you know, look, they're the children, I'm the adult in the room. With Rishi Sunak, he can't really do that. It's hard, you know, if you're not a politically engaged person going into the next election and you just sort of watch TV every now and then, it's hard to see what you would find between the two of them, really. And I think that's a big problem for Keir Starmer.
OK. Olivia, for now, thanks very much indeed. Well, don't go anywhere, because coming up, we're going to get the latest on what is another day of rail strikes today, this time by the ASLEF union. They represent the drivers, so trains at a standstill pretty much. Before all that, though, let's have a look at the weather for you.
Hello, I'm Alex Deakin, and this is your latest weather update from the Met Office. A fairly drab day out there. Lots of cloud, but it is pretty mild. Most places dry, but there is some rain around, courtesy of this area of low pressure, which is also increasing the winds, particularly these tightly packed isobars come into northwest Scotland tonight. But through the day, we've got these weather fronts straddling the country. They are bringing some light rain and drizzle over northern England. It is turning a bit wetter this afternoon over western parts of Scotland, and a bit of rain for Northern Ireland. For the bulk of England and Wales, there are just a few light showers here and there. Many places will just stay dry, but predominantly cloudy. Not much sunshine around today. Despite that lack of sun, it is very mild. Temperatures getting into the teens, 12, 13, perhaps even 14 in one or two spots. A little cooler further north, but still temperatures above average. This rain will sink south overnight, and the winds will really pick up across the far northwest. A very blustery night for the Western Isles and northern parts of the mainland of Scotland. That rain slinking south across England and Wales does move through fairly quickly. Clear skies following, and slightly cooler air following as well, but still most places avoiding of frost, generally in towns and cities several degrees above freezing to start Friday. And for most Fridays, a fine day. Some early rain across Kent. There will be plenty of showers coming in across Scotland, where it will remain blustery, but most of those by the afternoon confined to the Highlands, the Northern Isles and the Western Isles. A bit more cloud for Northern England, North Wales, and there could be some showery rain here through the afternoon, but I say most places dry and bright. Still mild for the time of year, but lower temperatures compared to today, but still getting up to 11, maybe 12 Celsius across parts of the south. Staying generally fine on Friday evening, but increasingly you will see showers into the southwest. And look at this big bank of rain moving in. That is a weather front that's going to sweep across the country on Friday night and Saturday, bringing us all a spell of rain. That'll be followed by blustery showers on Saturday afternoon, and then more showers on Sunday, turning a little cooler into next week.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice, We are here for you on radio, television, and online. Across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prisons? I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8".
My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
12:24. Good afternoon to you now. It's the third day of the current 5-day rail strike, but following the end of the 48-hour walkout by the RMT members last night, today it's the turn of ASLEF to take industrial action. The union represents train drivers in many companies, and this means some rail companies are running no services at all today. Rail links to the UK's two busiest airports will be cut, with the Gatwick Express and Heathrow Express shutting down. Well, our national reporter Paul Hawkins is at London Euston for us this afternoon, where the picket line is out in force there, Paul.
Yeah, it's a different picket line, same station, same kind of argument, really. To be honest, this one with ASLEF and the rail delivery group who represent the train operating companies. And essentially it's about pay and reform, similar to the dispute that's been ongoing between the rail delivery group, Network Rail and the RMT. So these are 15 train operators that will not be able to run today. I say 15 train operating companies who have been affected by this strike action. 4 of them are running a reduced service, but the rest, no service at all. This is 12,500 members who've gone on strike. There is no pay deal that has been put on the table from the rail delivery group, according to Mick Whelan, who's the boss of ASLEF. He spoke to us earlier.
Well, the big sticking point is, like many other workers, rail workers went to work during the pandemic. We did not seek a pay rise during the pandemic, even though the people that we're employed by, because we're not employed by the government, we're not employed by the DfT or the Treasury, we're employed by Trentalia, Rebelio, First Group and all the people in the privatised industry. And that's why we're on a strike in 15 different companies today. We're not striking against the government. But they made £500 million in the pandemic. Good luck to them. But then when the cost of living crisis started to hit and inflation started to rise in year 3, we went to our employers and said we need a pay rise and found out they'd done a rather immoral and corrupt deal with the government to keep their snouts in the trough, that they couldn't offer more than 2%. Needs to make the point we've never been offered that 2% over the 4 years. And they told us we had to talk to the government. So we went to the government and they said we can't get involved in negotiations, go and talk to the employers. So after being messed around and moved from pillar to post for months, we balloted our members. They gave us mandates in the high 90s for action short of a strike and strike action, and this is our 6th day of action, and we're now into year 4 without a pay offer.
Yeah, so that is Mick Whelan from ASLEF. They are due to meet with the Rail Minister and the train companies early next week. I think it's Monday they're meeting. So I asked him how he's feeling about that meeting, and he said he's hopeful that they will be able to reach some sort of agreement. But this is the 6th day of strike action, in addition to over 20 days of strike action that we've had from the RMT. And then from a passenger's point of view, don't forget that tomorrow we've got the second 48-hour walkout from the RMT starting. So tomorrow and Saturday, meaning that virtually all of this week, about a fifth of trains are running across the UK.
Yeah, it's a grim picture. Paul, for now, thanks very much indeed. I'd love to know what you think about that one. Is sympathy waning or perhaps not? A lot of the places we've been up and down the country this week, it seems people are still backing the strikers, actually, which perhaps is a little bit surprising. Well, perhaps not. GB Views at gbnews.uk. Lots of you getting in touch about Prince Harry. John, afternoon John, says, what a load of nonsense. Harry would kick the living stuffing out of William if there was a fight, which is what's being claimed. I don't know if that's true. Both have served. I don't know. Ken says, poor Harry. He should have joined the Girl Guides, not the army. That's a little bit harsh, isn't it? Perhaps a little bit harsh, anyway. Maybe I'm a softie. Richard says, we now understand who the common denominator is in the royal row. Meghan. I think the royal family did not take to this brash social climber. Harry was told, take it easy, but alas, he got on his high horse about Meghan. Royals have now lost mystique since the Queen passed. Perhaps it's time to get rid of them. What, get rid of them all? I imagine that going down well with most of the British population. No, perhaps I'm wrong. And Margaret, hi Margaret, says, if it's true that William hit Harry, all I can say is he didn't hit him hard enough. He should have knocked some sense into him. Well, I have to say, you are all being extremely tough this afternoon as far as that goes. And as I often say, I can see where you're coming from. I don't have a great deal of sympathy myself. But perhaps some of you do, and if you do, get in touch. gbviews at gbnews.uk. Coming up, we're going to be getting the latest as new car registrations fall to the lowest level in 30 years. And we're talking about COVID in China, following warnings from the World Health Organization that China is misrepresenting the true impact in the country. First, so, Rhiannon's got your news update.
Thank you, Stephen. It's just gone 12:30. Your top stories from the GB Newsroom. Sir Keir Starmer's promised a decade of national renewal if Labour comes to power. In his first speech of the new year, the Labour leader set out plans to modernise central government. He also claimed the Prime Minister has no ambition for the future.
You saw it yesterday from the Prime Minister. Commentary without solution. More promises, more platitudes. No ambition to take us forward. No sense of what the country needs. 13 years of nothing but sticking plaster politics. It's why every crisis hits Britain harder than our competitors. The only country in the G7 still poorer than it was before the pandemic. The worst decade for growth in 2 centuries. 7 million on waiting lists and rising.
Well, James Cleverly, meanwhile, says Labour has worked against finding solutions.
They've opposed our desire to bring in limitations on the abuse of unions, which causing strikes that are hurting ordinary working families. He's stood against our attempts to control illegal migration and get a grip of those people smuggling gangs. All the things that we've tried to do to bring real change, positive change to this country, the Labour Party have opposed time and time again, and all we saw in that speech was the same old from Labour.
Prince Harry reportedly claims in his autobiography Spare that he was physically attacked by his brother over his marriage to Meghan Markle. A leaked extract published in The Guardian alleges Prince William grabbed and knocked Harry to the floor in 2019. Buckingham Palace has declined to comment. And ASLEF says further strikes are inevitable unless there's a breakthrough in the long-running row over pay. It's the 3rd consecutive day of rail disruption across the UK, and it's even worse today with drivers from 15 different companies now on strike. Some areas have no trains at all running. TV, online and DAB Plus radio, this is GB News. Don't go anywhere. Steve will be back in just a moment with GB News Live.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Stein. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
We are GB News, the People's Channel. Why not take us home with you by visiting the GB News shop at gbnews.store. You'll find all the official merchandise, a really good present actually for yourself, your friends or your family.
We ship across the UK mainland at no extra cost. GB News, the People's Channel.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
As a guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
£12:34 now. Today was the turn of Sir Keir Starmer to tell voters how he plans to transform Britain if he gets power in the next election, whenever that may be. In a speech this morning, the Labour leader promised a decade of national renewal and continued his bid to be seen as the party of sound money, saying the UK can't spend its way out of the government's mess. He also emphasised how a power shift away from Westminster could transform our economy, our politics and our democracy. Well, let's get some analysis from our economics and business editor, Liam Halligan, who, as always, is on the money. So, Liam is here. What do you make of it? Did he say anything of any substance, economically speaking?
Not really. Both party leaders are being very, very cautious. You mentioned the next general election, Stephen. That's probably going to be in 2024. So 2023 is going to be all about framing the next general election, and both party leaders will cook out the blocks. Rishi Sunak obviously gave a speech yesterday. The Daily Star were lampooning that speech on their front page this morning with Blackadder and Baldrick saying, I've got a cunning plan. Inflation down, but we don't know by when. Debt down as a share of GDP, but we don't know by when. And there's some truth in that, like all good tabloid journalism. Sunak was very, very vague about what he's going to achieve and when, and many of the things he said he wants to achieve are probably going to happen anyway, like halving inflation by the end of the year. But if Sunak was vague, I'd say Keir Starmer was even vaguer. It's as if both party leaders, it's all about caution. It's not about, here's a really bold policy, here's something that we want to do that will help people have better lives, like, you know, on the housing front or energy bills. It's almost as if Starmer's saying, as long as I don't muck things up, I'm going to win this election. And I think that was very much the order of the day today. It was steady as she goes, take no risks.
I suppose he's in a problem, isn't he, being in opposition, in that he doesn't want to tie his hands too much because he's got to see what the economic situation is like when there is a general election.
He doesn't want to tie his hands. Sunak doesn't want to pledge to doing something that might not happen because then he can be beaten with a stick by the Labour Party. You don't deliver on your promises. And yet, while the politicians are playing these parlour games in Westminster, Stephen, and the media are getting all excited about it, back out there in the real world, GB News viewers and listeners are thinking, hang about, I'm really worried about my electricity bill. I'm really worried about whether my kid can buy a house or get a council house. I'm really worried about my employer because their energy bills are absolutely huge. Is there going to be a job for me? There's all these real-world concerns, and yet I think the politicians are sort of playing political footsie under the table. I thought the most important line from the Starmer speech, and indeed it was queued up by Rachel Reeves, Shadow Chancellor beforehand, was we can't spend their way out of their mess. And we're not going to get the big government chequebook out
Which is different from what, I mean, in the last financial crisis, I mean, that was their key argument, wasn't it? We need to spend our way out of it.
That's right, that's right. But now, because the tax burden's already at a 70-year high, the share of tax in our overall GDP, because the public knows after the debacle of the Liz Truss quasi-Kwarteng mini-budget that if we do spend too much, the bond markets freak out, that's a technical term, by the way, and then borrowing costs, mortgages, credit cards go much higher than they otherwise would be. So it's almost as if Labour want to do more than the Tories, but they don't want to spend any more. And that's why whenever people like you or me put them in a corner, they then wheel out this, oh, we're going to end non-dom tax status. What does that mean? That means a number of rich foreign people who make their home in the UK, their taxation on their UK income is less because they're taxed on their foreign income. And Labour strategists calculate that could raise for them about £3 billion. Well,
that's nothing.
There are two problems with that. First thing is you don't know if the people who you're taking away the status from, I mean, they could just move back to Monaco or whatever. Some of them will do that. But as you say, it's a drop in the ocean. £3 billion out of, 800-900 billion pounds of public spending a year, 200 billion spent on the NHS. It is a drop in the bucket, and that's a year, and the non-dom number is over a number of years.
Yeah, but also they've got the problem, haven't they? That, I mean, they're complaining, I mean, quite rightly so, a lot would say, about the tax burden at the moment. So they can't look at putting that up. They can't look at increasing that, because that would be absolutely hypocritical.
Labour actually opposed Rishi Sunak's increase, the social care levy, the rise in national insurance. So Labour actually opposed that.
So they can't go down that route. They don't want to go down the public spending cut route.
And that's why they're coming out with sort of vague platitudes. This isn't a party political point. I'm just analysing it as I see it, as I know you are and always do. We're going to come up with a new way of governing. We're going to devolve power from the centre. All kind of vague things that don't really mean anything to anybody sitting at home, knowing that the credit card bill is about to land on the mat, knowing that they've got to do their tax return if they run a small business, knowing that corporation tax is about to go up again if they run a small business. All these issues, and politicians don't seem to be grabbing the people's priorities, it seems to me. I personally think the country is up for a bit more bold and visionary leadership rather than this ultra-cautious, steady-as-she-goes politics.
What about the green energy credentials in all of that? Because whereas that satisfies an element of society, green energy, he was also talking about cheaper energy bills for everyone forever. He's talking about using it for economic growth because of all the jobs that could be created through that. I mean, that's something which is quite bold, isn't it?
Well, what Labour are trying to do is what the Democrats try to do in the States, to align their kind of university-educated, sort of Waitrose shopping voters with their less educated but often more streetwise Aldi and Lidl shopping voters. And around the green agenda. So the people in the university towns where Labour are fighting the Lib Dems, they'll like the idea of more environmental policies, particularly because we've seen quite a lot of slippage, some people would say, during this war in Ukraine with energy bills going up and so on. And yet you can make this green agenda interesting and palatable for the Red Wall voters if you point to something like Teesside, where, of course, there's a lot of Conservative MPs at the moment and a Tory Mayor, Ben Houchen, because on Teesside, that you have carbon capture storage systems, you have all kinds of biomass projects, trying to align the green agenda with the kind of post-industrial agenda in the form of green jobs, not just on insulation and building solar panels and things like that, but carbon capture and storage schemes. If you manufacture wind turbines, we're getting a big wind turbine factory on Teesside soon, building what will be the biggest offshore wind farm in the world, a collaboration between the British and the Norwegian government at Dogger Bank there in the middle of the North Sea. That's the kind of policies that Labour will be trying to champion, where you can align the Red Wolf side of Labour with the more kind of she university-educated side of Labour. This is what Keir Starmer has to try and do, so we're going to hear a lot more about this green agenda.
It's worth talking to you, Liam, just to hear she. It's very good. It's very good. Liam, thank you very much indeed. So that's what Liam thinks. Well, in the last few moments, we've heard what the Foreign Secretary, James Cleverly, thinks about what Sir Keir had to say.
Well, what I saw, I think what the whole country saw from that speech was a bit of a vacuum. He spoke a lot, didn't really say anything, and the things that we have had to deal with as a government over the last decade or so, including Russia's illegal and unprovoked invasion of Ukraine, a global pandemic, we've of course had to deal with. And Rishi Sunak, when he was Chancellor, put the largest support package, keeping people in their jobs, keeping people in their homes, helping them put food on the table. We saw the rollout of a vaccination, and we've now seen our strong commitment to Ukraine as it defends itself against Russia. That's what we've been doing. What I've yet to see, and what I don't think anyone saw in that speech, was any Labour plans for the future. Well, what the Prime Minister has committed to deliver is a reduction in inflation, a reduction in NHS waiting times, a reduction in illegal immigration, and all the mechanisms for doing these things are things the Labour Party have opposed. They've opposed our desire to bring in limitations on the abuse of unions, which causing strikes that are hurting ordinary working families. He stood against our attempts to control illegal migration and get a grip of those people smuggling gangs. All the things that we've tried to do to bring real change, positive change to this country, the Labour Party have opposed time and time again, and all we saw in that speech was the same old from Labour.
Well, who convinces you the most on that one? GBViews at gbnews.uk. I'd love to know, because as Liam was saying, it's platitudes from both sides, actually. Where's the meat in all of this? Because the Prime Minister's can at least deliver some of that meat in the more immediate term. The Labour Party can't until it gets, or if it gets, into power, whenever that may be. But if the arguments are swaying you one way or another, I'd love to hear your thoughts this afternoon. Right, let's move to the COVID situation, should we, in China, after the World Health Organization warned that China may be underrepresenting the true impact of COVID in the country, particularly around deaths, after the removal of the majority of restrictions a month ago led to a huge surge in the number of cases. They're talking about 1 billion cases. The country has stopped publishing daily case data and has introduced very specific criteria for defining a COVID death. Now, the World Health Organization says that definition is too narrow. Well, let's talk to someone who spent much of his career working in and on China, Charles Parton, who's Senior Associate Fellow at the Royal United Services Institute. Good to see you this afternoon. What's your assessment, Charles, of actually what is going on in China?
Well, I think the party has been overwhelmed by Omicron. It's just whatever policies they had wanted to keep in place have been swept away. Yes, I mean, there are must be many more deaths. Anecdotally, you hear of people who say 4 members of their family have died, or you see obituaries in various organizations. So they will be no better off than the rest of the world, I expect, when assaulted by this virus, and perhaps a little bit worse off because of the less efficient vaccines that they have. But the party's trying to hide it, and I think it's going to find that very difficult, because people, whatever the statistics that they publish, people will know of those that have fallen ill or have died as a result of COVID.
Does it matter in this as to whether China is telling us the truth or not in all of this? Because, as you say, it's a different dynamic over there. It is, you know, not a vaccinated country in the way that we are over here, and different, less effective vaccines for those who have been jabbed. Should we actually be concerned that they're fudging the numbers?
Well, of course, clearly the World Health Organization is concerned, otherwise it wouldn't have spoken out in the way that it has. And yes, I think the most important thing is of the data that we need to have is the genome sequencing and any indications of new variants, because that enables the faster that we have those indications, then the faster that we can improve our own vaccines and global vaccines to limit the damage. And there's no clear sign that the Chinese are being any more transparent and quick at providing the data than they were 3 years ago when the COVID first sprang upon us. and I think that's extremely disappointing. I mean, as for the numbers, I mean, it matters very much to the Chinese Communist Party because they've staked their reputation to some extent on the fact that their way of dealing with COVID and their form of governance is so much superior to the West. And Omicron is showing that, well, maybe it isn't actually, and maybe because of the lack of preparation, it's perhaps even worse. So it matters to them for sure.
Is there a political element, do you think, to what the government here is doing now that, I think it's from today, isn't it, that people travelling from China are going to have to test before departure, and then a certain number of people are going to be tested on arrival as well to see if there are any sort of genome differences and some more genome sequencing going on? Because, I mean, some of the scientists are saying, well, look, that doesn't achieve a great deal in a sense, but perhaps it is applying political pressure on China about being a little bit more transparent over what's going on.
And perhaps a little less hypocritical, since they too insist on these tests before arrivals in their country. I mean, I think the most important thing is, and I'm no scientist here, so I wouldn't be able to comment, but the most important thing is discovering whether there are new variants. And so a number of countries are looking at the wastewater that comes in aircraft and testing for those, so that then they can get that information as to whether there are new and dangerous variants. But I think you're right. I think there is, as far as I can see, a certain amount of politics in all this, that the politicians, not just in UK, but in Europe and America and Japan, elsewhere, are worried that their own people will say, what on earth are you doing when China has got this enormous explosion and you're allowing them in? Whether it makes any great difference to the numbers that suffer in our countries is another matter, because Omicron is pretty endemic in it already. It's a question, I suppose, of identifying those new variants, which would perhaps make a difference.
OK, Charles Parton, good to talk to you. Thanks very much. Now at 12:49, more than 60,000 mourners attended the funeral of Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI earlier today in St. Peter's Square in the Vatican City. The Mass was led by Pope Francis. It means it was the first time in 600 years that a current Pope has buried his predecessor. Benedict will now be buried in a crypt underneath St. Peter's Basilica, according to his wishes. Well, let's head to Westminster Cathedral, the centre of the Catholic Church in England, and our national reporter, Ellie Costello. Afternoon, Ellie.
Good afternoon to you, Stephen. Yes, I'm outside the mother church of the Catholic Church in England and Wales right now. This is Westminster Cathedral, and you can see just over my shoulder that the flag of the Vatican City is flying at half-mast today as a sign of respect for Pope Benedict XVI, who was laid to rest in the Vatican City today. And people have been coming in and out of the church today, paying their respects, saying a prayer, lighting a candle for the soul of Pope Benedict. And many have been remarking to me about how simple but poignant that service was this morning in the Vatican City. It's exactly as Pope Benedict XVI had requested. He wanted it to be simple. He wanted a plain coffin, a simple Catholic requiem mass, and that's exactly what was achieved today. Pope Benedict won't be remembered for his media personality. He didn't like the adoring crowds at the Vatican. He much preferred to be alone with his studies and with his books, and that kind of simple sense came across in the Mass today. Very reflective, very peaceful and quiet, like the man was himself. But just to show how loved Pope Benedict remains 10 years after he resigned as Pope of the Catholic Church, there was a gentle applause as his coffin was carried down the steps into St. Peter's Square. Many people clutching at their rosary beads and saying the rosary to themselves as his coffin was very gently placed onto the ground. I think it was quite significant to see Pope Francis, who's actually wheeled in a wheelchair to the funeral, not looking in great great health himself, but he looked like a grieving man, very human at that funeral as he presided over his predecessor's funeral. He spoke Pope Benedict's own writings in his sermon, which was a really beautiful tribute, and there was a very touching moment at the end of the funeral where he held the coffin of Pope Benedict and knelt his head in a final prayer. The two had become very close friends over the last 10 years. Pope Benedict had controversially remained living within the walls of the Vatican. He kept his name, Pope Benedict XVI, and he continued to wear his white papal gown. But the two did get along very well, despite being from different sides of the Catholic Church, Pope Benedict being a staunch conservative and Pope Francis being more of a forward thinker, more of a progressive ruler in the Catholic Church. And it will be very interesting to see now how Pope Francis's leadership changes now that he is standing alone as head of the Catholic Church. But it really was a truly beautiful service today, very peaceful and immensely reflective on a man who changed history when he was the first pope to abdicate in over 600 years.
Ellie, thank you. Well, let's head over to the Vatican and speak to someone who was at the funeral. That's a Catholic journalist, Diane Montagna. Good to see you, Diane. This must
Good to see you. Thank you.
For you, this must have been an incredibly sombre moment.
Well, it was really. I had begun to translate Pope Benedict's Wednesday catechesis. These would be teachings that he gives every Wednesday to the Catholic faithful some years ago. He was certainly at his best when he went off script, and he had a profound way of teaching the Catholic faith. So yes, it was a very solemn day for everyone. The weather reflected that as well in St. Peter's Square. Yes, but a beautiful day, and a beautiful day to remember all that he is to the Catholic faithful.
It is interesting, isn't it, that, I mean, he was a quiet man in many respects, and the simple coffin just seemed to be the perfect reflection of him in death, really.
Yes, he did. He was, in many ways, a simple man. He was a quiet and very humble man. I was honored to meet him a couple of times, and what came across was his meekness and his humility. At the same time, there were nearly 100,000 people in St. Peter's Square today for the funeral. Some almost 4,000 priests, several hundred bishops, 120 cardinals, which, to put that into perspective, is about one half of the college, the Sacred College of Cardinals. Very notably was the presence of the former Archbishop of Hong Kong, Cardinal Joseph Zen, who, despite recently being summoned by the Hong Kong authorities to trial, was nonetheless given the permission to travel to Rome in order to be here for the solemn funeral of Benedict XVI. So that was particularly striking today, to have Cardinal Zen, whom many regard as a heroic defender of the faith in China and Hong Kong, to have him here in St. Peter's Square.
Yeah, as you say, an important moment. Can I just ask you briefly, what do you think his legacy will be, Benedict's key legacy will be?
Yeah, well, I do think he's known really as a great teacher. And I think in a way very relatable to many people. He taught that both faith and reason are very much in harmony, that one can't have true faith without reason, and that one can't properly exercise reason to the full without a true faith. He was sometimes, and it must be admitted, pejoratively called the Rottweiler. But he was only a true defender of the Catholic faith. And that really is the Pope's job, to confirm the brethren in the faith and to defend it. So he was certainly true to that vocation of a Pope. I would say he also managed to teach the true meaning of life, both to Catholics and to non-Catholics, and to point people to not so much to the here and now, but to a life and an eternity, hopefully, loving God. His last words, according to his personal secretary, Archbishop Georg Ganswein, were, "Jesus, I love you." And I think that really summed up his whole life of dedication to God and to the Church.
Diane, really good to talk to you this afternoon. Thanks very much indeed.
And to you.
OK, let's just run through a couple of your thoughts that you've sent through this afternoon. Michael, hi Michael, says, in my persuasion, the unions are out of control, and for Labour to get my vote in any election, Sir Keir Starmer needs to rein them in. Jennifer says, poor wee Harry, someone needs to get him a blanket and a dummy. Wasn't he an army man? Well, yes, he was, but perhaps he's softened a little bit since those days. Anyway, keep your thoughts coming through. GBviews at gbnews.uk. Love to hear what you think this afternoon. We're back with all your top stories in just a couple of minutes.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing! You see, amazing!
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
My name's Tom Harwood, and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
It's 1 o'clock. Very good afternoon to you. This is GB News Live. This is what we've got coming up for you in the next hour. He's back. Prince Harry with yet more allegations against his family, this time alleging Prince William pushed him to the floor after a dispute in Kensington Palace. We'll get the latest from our royal reporter, and we'll be speaking to royal broadcaster Rafe Haydel-Mankoo on all of this. Sir Keir Starmer has this morning set out his political vision for Britain, saying 2023 is going to mark a new chapter for the country and it needs change and national renewal. He also distanced himself from the party's previous leader, Jeremy Corbyn, highlighting changes made under his watch, including on NATO, national security and anti-Semitism. We'll see if we get a verdict on what you think on all of that. And, of course, yet more strikes, I'm afraid. Despite the RMT ending their 48-hour walkout last night, ASLEF have taken over today. No words from the PM yesterday about strikes, but there are rumours circulating that he may be preparing legislation to combat the strike action. As always, I'd love to hear from you this afternoon. You know how to get in touch. gbviews@gbnews.uk. Before everything, though, let's go through the latest headlines for you with Rhiannon.
Stephen, thank you. Good afternoon. It's just gone 2 minutes past 1. Your top stories from the GB Newsroom. Sir Keir Starmer's promised a decade of national renewal if Labour comes to power. In his first speech of the new year, the Labour leader set out plans to modernise central government. A day after Rishi Sunak outlined his 5 promises, Sir Keir claimed the Prime Minister doesn't have the solutions to the country's problems.
You saw it yesterday from the Prime Minister. Commentary without solution. More promises, more platitudes. No ambition to take us forward. No sense of what the country needs. 13 years of nothing but sticking plaster politics. It's why every crisis hits Britain harder than our competitors. The only country in the G7 still poorer than it was before the pandemic. The worst decade for growth in 2 centuries. 7 million on waiting lists and rising.
Well, Foreign Secretary James Cleverly, meanwhile, says Labour has worked against finding solutions.
They've opposed our desire to bring in limitations on the abuse of unions, which causing strikes that are hurting ordinary working families. He stood against our attempts to control illegal migration and get a grip of those people smuggling gangs. All the things that we've tried to do to bring real change, positive change to this country, the Labour Party have opposed time and time again, and all we saw in that speech was the same old from Labour.
Prince Harry reportedly claims he was attacked by his brother over his marriage to Meghan Markle in his autobiography Spare. A leaked extract published in The Guardian alleges Prince William grabbed Harry by the collar and knocked him to the floor in 2019, leaving him with a visible mark to his back. Harry also claims William called the American actress difficult, rude and abrasive. Buckingham Palace has declined to comment. Up to 60,000 mourners are thought to have gathered in St. Peter's Square at the Vatican this morning for the funeral of former Pope Benedict XVI. The Mass was led by Pope Francis. It's the first time in 600 years that the current Pope has buried his predecessor. Benedict XVI is being laid to rest in a crypt beneath St. Peter's Basilica, according to his wishes. The government's decided it won't go ahead with a plan to privatise Channel 4. The idea to sell the broadcaster was announced during Boris Johnson's government. Former Culture Secretary Nadine Dorries had said government ownership was holding the channel back, but her successor, Michelle Donnellan's, decided the broadcaster shouldn't be sold. She's instead proposed other reforms, including greater commercial flexibility. ASLEF says further strikes are inevitable unless there's a breakthrough in the long-running row over pay. It's the 3rd consecutive day of rail disruption across the UK, and it's even worse today, with drivers from 15 different companies now on strike. Some areas have no trains at all running. ASLEF's General Secretary Mick Whelan told us union members won't back down.
I'm always hopeful, but the longer it goes on, the problems get greater. When we first started talking, inflation was 5.2%. It went to 14% last year. So 14% last year and in double digits this year. Effectively, over the 4 years, my members have seen a 25% cut in their living standards, as have many other workers. How long can that go on for?
New car sales have sunk to their lowest level in 30 years. Preliminary data shows that around 1.6 million were registered here in the UK last year, a quarter below pre-COVID levels. Supply shortages of items such as semiconductors are being blamed, driven by coronavirus lockdowns in China. Electric cars, though, made up 23% of all newly registered vehicles. A British tourist has been shot dead in Jamaica in what police there think may have been a contract killing ordered in the UK. 33-year-old Sean Patterson from West London was shot multiple times by the pool of his holiday villa in St James. The personal trainer was on his first visit to the island to meet his father. Jamaican police say one man's been taken into custody as they continue to work on the case with UK authorities. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now, though, it's back to Stephen with GB News Live.
Rhiannon, thank you. It's 7 minutes past 1. Now, Prince Harry reportedly claims in his autobiography Spare that he was physically attacked by his brother over his marriage to Meghan Markle. A leaked extract in The Guardian alleges Prince William grabbed the Duke of Sussex by the collar and knocked him to the floor in 2019, which left him with a visible injury to his back. He also claimed William called the American actress difficult, rude and abrasive. Well, not surprisingly, Buckingham Palace has declined to comment. Meanwhile, a trailer has been released for a new interview to promote the book that the Prince has done with ITV. Let's have a look.
I don't know how staying silent is ever going to make things better.
Wouldn't your brother say to you, Harry, how could you do this to me? After everything we went through, wouldn't that be what he would say?
He'd probably say all sorts of different things.
Some people will say, you have railed against invasions of your privacy all your life. But the accusation will be, here are you invading the privacy of your most nearest and dearest without permission. That'll be the accusation.
That'll be the accusation from the people that don't understand or don't want to believe that my family have been briefing the press.
If you're invited to the coronation, will you come?
There's a lot that can happen between now and then. But, you know, the door is always open. The ball is in their court. There's a lot to be discussed, and I really hope that they are willing to sit down and talk about it.
Do you still believe in the monarchy?
Yes.
Do you believe you'll play a part in its future?
I don't know.
Well, in the studio with me is our Royal reporter, Cameron Walker. Afternoon, Cameron. Amidst all of this, and of course, this is all promoting the new book, which is very much under lock and key, unless you're in Spain.
Unless you're in Spain, yes. Those two interviews which Prince Harry has done to promote his new memoir, which is meant to be released on January the 10th. If you're in Spain, it appears it's been released today. They have accidentally gone on sale 5 days early. So a number of people have got their hands on a Spanish version of the book called, I think it's En la Sombra, which translates as In the Shadow, i.e. spare, which is what it's called in the United Kingdom, i.e. Harry being the spare to Prince William being the heir, the future king of the United Kingdom, Great Britain and Northern Ireland. Which is interesting because the extract which has been leaked by The Guardian this morning of this memoir appears to allege Prince Harry alleges that his brother pushed him to the floor. He cracks his back on a dog bowl, which then smashed, and he had visible injuries. I think to many people, they will see this as a brotherly spat, as perhaps what happens with most family members. But the fact that Prince Harry is choosing to tell the world, let's face it, an altercation, a private altercation he had with his brother, who happens to be heir to the throne, isn't going to go down too well in royal circles. As you said, Kensington Palace and Buckingham Palace are not commenting on this, as they haven't done throughout this entire saga, really.
But it seems, I mean, as you say, if this happened in any family, it would be unpleasant. You know, you don't want brothers to be physically fighting, never mind, falling out in any way, shape or form. But it's happened, and it does happen. But it's in the public domain now, which then seems to go against everything he's been saying about, well, the ball's in his court, we want back in, we want friendly relations. Well, not if you've made this public.
Well, exactly. I think Prince Harry, one of the reasons he left as a working member of the royal family to California was to have more privacy, and yet he has chosen to release a very intimate conversation he had between his brother and his father, the then Prince Charles, now King, following the Duke of Edinburgh's funeral in 2021, where he alleges that Prince Charles stood between him and his brother who were fighting, and Charles said, "Boys, please don't make my final years a misery." So clearly that's a deeply personal moment to the then Prince Charles, now King, and Harry yet again has chosen to air that viewpoint. That ITV trailer we just watched with Tom Bradby, Tom does actually challenge Prince Harry on that point of you are releasing details, private family moments. And Prince Harry said that's because he believes that the palace have leaked stories about me, and the people who would make that allegation that I am giving away intimate details about my family don't understand or don't want to believe that Buckingham Palace has allegedly been involved in planting stories and colluding with the press to make Harry and Meghan look like villains and the rest of the royal family look better.
Even if everything he and Meghan are saying is absolutely true, and of course, people are taking a lot of it with a pinch of salt because we're only getting one side of it. But even if it was all absolutely true, is he still running out of steam? now, because once he's said it, what's he going to do? We can't keep telling the same stories.
Well, that was one of the criticisms of the CBS interview, the fact he was talking about all this palace leaking and planting of stories, which is exactly what he said in the Netflix documentary series, which aired in December. And Meghan, in turn, voiced the same concerns she voiced in Oprah back in 2021. I mean, I was in Boston with the Prince and Princess of Wales back in December, late November, and even in the United States, from people I was speaking to there, they are growing tired of this victim narrative which Harry and Meghan appear to be painting for themselves. And I think the challenge for the Duke and Duchess of Sussex is getting out of that victim narrative, that mindset, and actually changing and having something else to talk about, which is going to be sellable, because there's only so much selling of the victim narrative and you being a former working member of the royal family that you can do before people get bored of it.
Yeah. OK. Cameron, thanks very much indeed. Well, let's talk to royal broadcaster and commentator Rafe Haydel-Mankoo, who joins us now. Rafe, it's good to see you. What do you make of all of this?
Well, I think the first thing to say, of course, is that these are so far unsubstantiated allegations. We've not seen any evidence corroborating any of this, no other witnesses to this event, and no word from the palace. So it's Harry's word alone. And as we know from the past couple of years, Harry and Meghan have form when it comes to, let's say, bending the truth. But, let's be generous here and give him the benefit of the doubt. Even if this incident did occur, of course, it takes two to tango. And as we know from any sort of marriage or relationship that goes sour, you often get two very different versions of the facts. And if we ever do hear the Prince of Wales's version, it may cast an entirely different light on the matter. Personally, I think many people in Britain might think Prince Harry got off quite lightly. Never mind bruises and a broken necklace. In an earlier era, he'd have been sent to the Tower for his disgraceful actions. But what I think it's worth noting is that for all of their alleged honesty, and it goes to the book as much as to the documentary, in the long and tawdry history of the Harry and Meghan story, we've never once had them admit a single error on their part or a single mistake. If you watch the documentary, and as I'm sure you will see in this book as well, everything is always someone else's fault. It's the monarchy, it's the media, it's even Brexit voters that have you believe that they're completely faultless and without blemish. And of course, I would hope that even their supporters understand that that's impossible to be true. And I think you have to view this alleged incidents in that light.
I mean, it's interesting that in this extract, which has been leaked, that the Guardian's got hold of, one of the sort of big complaints against William is that he called Meghan difficult, rude and abrasive. Well, it's not as though we haven't heard that from other people as well. It seems an odd thing for Harry to have put in the book, in a way.
Yeah, well, they say love is blind, right? And I think it's quite clear that Harry's completely blind when it comes to the machinations of his wife, Meghan, the Yoko Ono of the royal family. I mean, look at it from Prince William's perspective. This is a man who spent his life protecting his younger brother and protecting and trying to protect the royal family. And here, you can see why he would be so concerned in 2019 with all of these terrible things happening to his family and breaking up their relationship. And as he sees it, trying to protect his brother from getting too far involved with Meghan Markle. So even if the allegation is true, I'm not surprised that Prince William was frustrated or infuriated or even despondent at the situation, and that his brother's stupidity and being so blind to this. I'm just glad, that the Queen isn't here to see this, to see her own grandson actually betray her legacy, betray his family, and betray, the institution that's given him and his wife everything that they wanted.
I mean, one of the things we heard earlier in the week from the previews of the interview were that he wanted his brother and father back. Do you think that's ever going to be a possibility now?
Well, this is what's remarkable. He said in that clip that we've just had with Tom Bradby that silence doesn't make anything better. Well, maybe not, but going public makes things a lot worse. If he had stayed silent about this, as you were just discussing with Cameron there, 10 days ago was Christmas Day. We were all around the dining table with our families. I'm sure there were thousands of altercations or at least emotional arguments that took place. I'm sure very few of them went onto Twitter immediately afterwards to proclaim this. The royal family extended 3 olive branches to Harry and Meghan. We had the king referring very warmly to them in his first speech when he ascended the throne, saying Harry and Meghan are building their lives overseas. We saw the Prince and Princess of Wales extend an olive branch by inviting Harry and Meghan to join them in viewing the flowers laid by well-wishers outside Windsor Castle after the death of the Queen, a magnanimous gesture. And most magnanimously, if reports are to be believed, the King also opened a door and an invitation to them both to attend his coronation. You know, the British nation may have given up on Harry, but of course the King is also a father. And what could be more Christian, I think, than as a Christian king and at Christmas time to have that door open to his prodigal son? Now, I think with this book, if the excerpts are to be believed, I think that door is on the way to being firmly shut.
Yeah, well, it's a sad reality, isn't it, I'm afraid. Rafe, as always, it's good to see you. Thanks very much.
Thanks so much.
I feel very sad. I feel very sad about it all. When you look at it from a family perspective, I think it's a really sad situation. But can it be resolved? You sort of almost got to hope so, haven't you? I don't know. Let me know. gbviews@gbnews.uk. Now, earlier today, the Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer set out his political vision for Britain, saying 2023 would mark a new chapter for the country and that it needs change and national renewal. He also tried to distance himself from Jeremy Corbyn, highlighting changes that have been made under his watch, including on NATO, national security and anti-Semitism. Let's have a brief listen to some of the key moments from his speech.
A hope to flourish, Britain needs change. And I don't think anyone seriously disputes that. It's the story of the country right now. Amidst all the chaos is a growing impatience for change, for real change, lasting change, national renewal. And yes, as they've done throughout our history, the British people are turning to Labour to provide that change. In 2022, they looked at us again, and I felt, for the first time in a while, we could return their gaze with confidence. That the changes we've made on anti-Semitism, on national security and NATO, on making economic stability the platform for everything we do, has restored a degree of trust, laid a foundation. And this year we've got to build on that. People know we care. They always know the Labour Party cares. And they can now see a party that is both competent and compassionate. A party that understands what it means to put service to the country first. We can feel the public looking at us again, and we won't let up. We'll work every day to earn their trust, show them a new way of governing, and lead them to the fairer, greener, more dynamic Britain where aspiration is rewarded, working people succeed, communities control their own destiny, and where politics doesn't hide from the big challenges that face our children. Thank you very much.
Let's head to East London then, and our political reporter, Catherine Forster, who was listening to Keir Starmer's speech. Catherine, do you think he came up with anything of any significance there? I mean, certainly there was a great deal of emphasis on how different the party was under his leadership compared to that of Jeremy Corbyn.
Yes, he's very keen, isn't he, to stress that Labour have changed and changed very fundamentally. When Keir Starmer became leader just a couple of years ago, it was thought that it would take him many years, potentially 2 terms, to get Labour back away from the far left, away from momentum, away from the Corbynites, back towards the centre. He appears to have reinvented Labour and done it in a very short time. And if the opinion polls are to be believed, with Labour 20 points ahead, it looks like, events notwithstanding, they are potentially heading for power. There's a real energy, there's a real enthusiasm. They wanted to give a positive vision going forward. But what struck me most were those 3 words: take back control, which was really quite surprising because, of course, that was the slogan dreamt up by Dominic Cummings that helped to get the Brexit vote across the line, that helped convince people to vote to leave the EU. And Keir Starmer campaigned passionately for Remain. He pushed very heavily then for a second referendum. He's really the last person you'd expect to come out with that phrase, but he was very keen to stress that when he'd been going around the country campaigning for Remain, he said that he couldn't disagree with the basic case of what people wanted in terms of opportunities for their children, good public services, jobs available, and that people felt that power was too centralised and too far away from them. So rather than sort of leaning away from Brexit, where you would think he might have been potentially very vulnerable, he's actually leaning into it and saying, OK, we've heard you, we get it, we understand, we are going to give power back to the communities, to local people. They understand much better than politicians in Westminster and EU, the argument as far as they are concerned. That argument is over. So I think that is significant. Obviously, they would like to appeal to the red wall voters that left them over Brexit in 2019 and to win some of them back. So I think it is an interesting development. Much of that we've heard before, but this take back control framing is new.
Yeah, some clever thinking going on there. Catherine, thanks very much indeed. Well, look, coming up, we're going to get the very latest on what is another day of rail strikes, this time by ASLEF, and we'll talk to our national reporter, Paul Hawkins, who's on the picket line. Before all that, though, let's take a short break.
I'm Mark Dolan. Join me at 11 on GB News for Headliners, in which I'll be joined by two of the UK's top comedians discussing tomorrow's papers. If it's an important story, we'll cover it, but we'll have some fun along the way. Headliners, the late-night paper review that won't send you to sleep like the others will. 7 nights a week at 11 p.m. on GB News.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes & Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes & Kerr.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512,
Virgin Media Channel 604,
Freesat Channel 216,
Freeview Channel 236,
and YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio,
with the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's 1:25 and it's the third day of the current 5-day rail strike. But following the end of a 48-hour walkout by RMT members last night, today it's the turn of the ASLEF union to take industrial action. Now, they represent train drivers in many companies, and it means that some rail companies are running no services at all today. Rail links to the UK's busiest airports are going to be cut as well. The Gatwick Express and the Heathrow Express are shut down. Let's talk to our national reporter, Paul Hawkins, who's at London Euston, where they've been on the picket line there today. Look, what are they saying, Paul? The fact that, obviously, it's interesting to get the perspective of ASLEF compared to the RMT in terms of what they're after.
Yeah, it is. I mean, the fundamentals of the dispute are pretty similar to the one that the RMT has, but these are train drivers. There's 12,500 members in ASLEF who've decided to strike today. It's affecting 15 train operators across the UK, 4 of which are running of severely limited service, the rest no service. And it's pretty much the same picture for passengers as yesterday and the day before. Yes, it was the RMT striking yesterday and Tuesday, that 48-hour strike, the first of 2 this week. But essentially, it's a different union, but similar argument and a similar effect on the rail network. Although I would say the difference between this dispute and the one that the RMT have is that the RMT have received offers from the Rail Delivery Group and Network Rail. ASLEF, however, say they have yet to receive an offer from the Rail Delivery Group, who represent the train companies, as the boss of ASLEF, Mick Whelan, has been telling me earlier.
Well, the big sticking point is, like many other workers, rail workers went to work during the pandemic. We did not seek a pay rise during the pandemic, even though the people that we're employed by, because we're not employed by the government, we're not employed by the DfT or the Treasury, we're employed by Trentalia, Rebelio, First Group, and all the people in the privatised industry. And that's why we're on strike in 15 different companies today. We're not strike against the government. But they made £500 million in the pandemic. Good luck to them. But then when the cost of living crisis started to hit and inflation started to rise in year 3, we went to our employers and said we need a pay rise, and found out they'd done a rather immoral and corrupt deal with the government to keep their snouts in the trough, that they couldn't offer more than 2%. Needs to make the point we've never been offered that 2% over the 4 years. And they told us we had to talk to the government. So we went to the government and they said we can't get involved in negotiations, go and talk to the employers. So after being messed around and moved from pillar to post for months, we balloted our members. They gave us mandates in the high 90s for action short of a strike and strike action, and this is our 6th day of action, and we're now into year 4 without a pay offer.
So that's what ASLEF have to say. Stephen Montgomery, who's the chair of the Rail Delivery Group, says, look, we're not asking people to work for longer for less pay. We're just saying, can you be more flexible within your 35-hour working week? Let's talk about pay. Obviously, that would mean that if you're going to get paid more, then we would have to be talking about some reforms to the way the railways are run. So kind of the fundamentals of this disagreement are the same as the one that the RMT has. And speaking of the RMT, they go on strike for the second of their 48-hour walkouts this week, starting tomorrow and Saturday. So pretty much most of the rail network in an awful state this week.
Yeah, it's a grim picture. Paul, thanks very much indeed. Loads of you getting in touch this afternoon. Thank you very much indeed. gbviews@gbnews.uk. And I have to say, it's Harry that's got you talking. John, afternoon, John, says... I'll have to agree with this. This is common sense from John. So William supposedly called Meghan difficult, rude and abrasive. Has it occurred to Harry that she might have been? Christine says, wounded by a dog bowl. I fell backwards onto granite cobbles when nearly 80 and gained a massive bruise with diamond shapes on my bottom. But I didn't contact GPs as I couldn't get an appointment. What sort of soldier was Harry to whine about such a wound? Clutching at straws to make money. A better option would be a proper job. And Nick says, Stephen, you chose the right word. Sad. Nothing more to add. One word says it all. Well, if you've got a view, I'd love to hear it. gbviews@gbnews.uk. We've got lots more to come this hour, including more on the NHS under pressure, new car sales down, lowest in 30 years, and the Welsh First Minister criticised for his visit to Qatar. And on top of that, chaos in the US Congress. First, though, let's get a news update for you.
Good afternoon, it's coming up to 1:31. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB Newsroom. Sir Keir Starmer's promised a decade of national renewal if Labour comes to power. In his first speech of the new year, the Labour leader set out plans to modernise central government. He also claimed the Prime Minister has no ambition for the future.
You saw it yesterday from the Prime Minister. Commentary without solution. More promises, more platitudes. No ambition to take us forward. No sense of what the country needs. 13 years of nothing but sticking plaster politics. It's why every crisis hits Britain harder than our competitors. The only country in the G7 still poorer than it was before the pandemic. The worst decade for growth in 2 centuries. 7 million on waiting lists and rising.
Foreign Secretary James Cleverly, meanwhile, says Labour has worked against finding solutions.
They've opposed our desire to bring in limitations on the abuse of unions, which causing strikes that are hurting ordinary working families. He stood against our attempts to control illegal migration and get a grip of those people smuggling gangs. All the things that we've tried to do to bring real change, positive change to this country, the Labour Party have opposed time and time again, and all we saw in that speech was the same old from Labour.
Prince Harry reportedly claims in his autobiography Spare that he was physically attacked by his brother over his marriage to Meghan Markle. A leaked extract published in The Guardian alleges Prince William grabbed and knocked Harry to the floor in 2019. Buckingham Palace has declined to comment. And ASLEF says further strikes are inevitable unless there's a breakthrough in the long-running row over pay. It's the third consecutive day of rail disruption across the UK, and it's even worse today with drivers from 15 different companies now on strike. Some areas have no trains at all running. TV online and DAB Plus radio, this is GB News. Don't go anywhere. GB News Live. We'll be right back with Stephen in just a moment.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversation and online across England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison? I don't believe in prison.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, We're
on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8".
My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's 1:35. Now, a Yorkshire man who lost his wife of almost 25 years is calling for answers after it took the NHS more than 16 hours to get an ambulance to her. Teresa Simpson's death emerged as health officials warn that as many as 500 people a week are dying as a result of delays in emergency care. Anna Riley reports.
Ashes are now all that are left of Matthew Simpson's 54-year-old wife, Teresa. Teresa suffered from diabetes and a muscle wasting disease and fell ill at home before she tragically died in hospital after a heart attack and lack of oxygen to her brain. Matthew believes the 16-hour wait for an ambulance was to blame for the loss of his soulmate.
I still believe that if the ambulance came here in a good time, in maybe a six-hour window, I still believe my wife would have been in hospital. They would have realised straight away that her sugar level has dropped, gave her the glucose or whatever she needed, and she would have been on a heart monitor. So if she did have a heart attack, she would have been in hospital on a heart monitor and they would have known not have a heart attack at home. How many more people are going to lose their life? How many more people are going to have to go through what I've gone through this past 5 weeks? It's unfair. My wife shouldn't have, yeah, we knew she was going to lose her life one day, but not like this, not to be left when they know she has myotonic dystrophy, diabetes and confused. Something needs to change. We either, you need to be pumping more money into it or we need to be changing the government.
Matthew is struggling to come to terms with Teresa's death and feels the NHS failed her.
She wasn't only just my wife, but she was my best friend. She was my soulmate. We could finish each other's sentences. We could come out with, sometimes we'd come up with the same word. And if we did, one of us would say snap, the other one would say crackle, and the other one would say pop. And that's how we was. She was not only his wife, but she was very supportive. She never once, in my entire life of being married to her, never once moaned about her illness. I would lay down and die for her. I seriously would, because she was an outstanding woman.
In response to Matthew's complaint, Yorkshire Ambulance Service said, "Our thoughts are with Mr Simpson on the sad loss of his wife Teresa in November 2022, and we offer him our sincere condolences. Our patient relations team has received correspondence from Mr Simpson raising concerns about our response to this incident." With hundreds dying every week because of delays in emergency healthcare, Matthew hopes that sharing his heartbreak will push for reforms to be made to the NHS. Anna Riley, GB News, Hull.
Now, new car sales have fallen to their lowest level since 1992. That's 30 years ago. About 1.6 million new cars were registered during 2022. That's according to the Society of Motor Manufacturers and Traders. It's 2% down on 2021, more than 20% down on pre-pandemic levels. Well, let's talk to our economic and business editor, Liam Halligan, who's on the money. So, Liam, what's going on? Why are car sales so low and car production low as well, actually?
Well, these are authoritative numbers from the SMMT, the Society of Motor Manufacturers and Traders. They've been monitoring our car industry literally for decades. And during 2022 as a whole, new car sales and registrations were down on 2021. That's because ongoing supply chain issues around the world, a lack of semiconductors, difficulties with shipping and delivery, getting all those components together that you need to build a car, a very, very complex thing. Having said that, even though for the year as a whole, new car sales were down, in December 2022, that was 18% up on December 2021, which shows the supply chain pressures are easing and we are getting a bit more throughput in terms of new car sales. And I've discussed this with Mike Hawes, who is the CEO of the SMMT. This is what he had to say.
2023, we're actually forecasting an uplift, maybe 15%. So we're going to look counter-cyclical. Yes, the economic challenges everyone faces are severe. But most people buy a new car on a form of finance, which fixes in a cost for 3 or 4 years. And if the cost of running that new vehicle is cheaper than the one you already own, it can be advantageous to a household income.
So there's some advantage looking forward to this year. Let's hope he follows through on that, or the numbers follow through on that. But what did we see this last year in terms of the type of cars being sold?
It's interesting. Mike Hawes there from the SMMT saying that he expects new car sales to be sharply up during 2023, despite the cost of living squeeze. You may think, well, he would say that, wouldn't he, because he's from sort of car industry. That's not the case. These guys don't say things they don't think are going to be true. Their reputation for being predictively accurate is more important to them. But because the supply chain pressures are easing, and because most people buy new cars on finance, and because it can actually be sometimes cheaper to run a new car than an old jalopy, and because a lot of cars that are bought, over half, are bought by companies as parts of fleets, and companies may be looking towards the end of the recession, sort of towards the back end of the year. That's why Mike Hawes is saying that. But looking at the fine print, you ask about the different types of cars. I thought this was actually the really interesting part of the story. So I've put some of these numbers up in a graphic, and GB News listeners on the radio have to take my word for it. Petrol cars accounted for 55.9% of all new cars during 2023, Stephen. But hang on to your hats, look at this. Diesel Diesel, just 9.6%. Now, diesel used to account for more than half of all vehicles sold until relatively recently. We used to be told diesel was better for the environment, remember?
Yeah.
Then you had that Volkswagen emissions scandal in 2015 and the sort of conventional wisdom on diesel changed. What's taking the place of diesel then? Well, here it is. Electric cars. These are pure battery-driven electric cars. 16.6% of all new car sales in 2022. More than diesel for the first time ever and really racing ahead. And then we had hybrids. They were 11.6%. So they are cars with electric batteries, but as you drive them, then they recharge those batteries off the engine. So sometimes you can switch to the electric mode, but then you have the petrol mode.
So it makes it a lot more efficient, actually.
And also, it gets over what we call so-called range anxiety, where people are worried that their electric car will run out and they have to wait ages for charging because the infrastructure isn't there the same way it is for petrol and diesel. So look, we're still a major car manufacturer in this country. Midlands, North East, Wales, we're still making lots and lots of cars. And so for people working in the car industry, it's not all bad news. The headlines are lowest figures for since 1992 for 30 years. But if you actually drill down, partly because of the increase in EVs and other forms of vehicles, the outlook isn't too bad for 2023.
I wonder if some of the jump in figures for 2023 is down to the fact that we've all been told, if you've been looking for a car, well, if you want to order a new one, there's going to be a 12-month wait.
There's also...
And so that is now coming into play.
Exactly right. It's pent-up demand, so the supply chain issues, they are now, post-COVID, are now gradually being solved. Just as we're going into recession, the productive ability of the entire global economy is getting back into gear after that really important lockdown. And that's another reason why we're expecting a bit of a surge in the figures in 2023, despite the cost of living crisis, not least because of that pent-up demand. You heard it here first.
OK, Liam, thanks very much indeed. Well, let's talk to Erin Baker, who's editorial director at Auto Trader. Erin, good to see you this afternoon. I mean, do you think we should be concerned about these figures or looking forward, as the SMMT is saying, to this year, to 2023, when they're expecting a significant hike?
Yeah, no, I don't think 2022 was disastrous. It was not great news at all for the automotive industry or consumers who were trying to buy a car and finding that prices have gone up and there wasn't enough supply to meet their demands. But I think, as you've alluded to, actually we've had 5 consecutive months again of growth. December looked great. 2023 and 2024, the forecasts are good. And the forecast is also increasingly healthy for the consumer. The prices of electric cars, which are on average still 37% more expensive than their petrol or diesel counterparts, that will continue to drop. We will get to price parity between electric and petrol and diesel, we hope, by kind of 2025. And all the time, battery technology is improving, range is increasing. So the outlook is good for the consumer going forward. What we won't see, though, big caveat, don't expect to see a massive crash in prices. We don't expect that at Auto Trader. There's a slight softening in new and used prices, but we're not expecting any crash.
I mean, this is, in terms of EVs, the electric vehicles, this is very positive, isn't it? In the sense that, you've got to get the public on board because we're heading towards, scrapping all petrol and diesel new sales by 2030, which is not far away.
No, it's not far away. And, we look at the barriers to mass adoption of electric vehicles by consumers, and 2 things are apparent. One is price. And as I said, we will hope to see prices of electric cars coming more onto parity with internal combustion engine. But the other big problem, the other huge stumbling block is infrastructure and public charging points. And the SMMT has been forecasting in these figures that are out today that we need, at the low end of the estimate, another 300,000 public charging points by 2030, and that would mean putting them in at the rate of 100 a day, and we're currently putting into place about 27 a day on average. So there's a lot of work still to be done around the infrastructure.
What about keeping the power on? It's the only thing that concerns me. Maybe I'm a bit of a cynic. Who knows, Erin? But you sort of think, well, electric vehicles, all well and good. I'd quite like one, to be honest. But, it's keeping the power on and the electricity is getting more expensive. So there's slightly less of a financial incentive, isn't there?
Well, it's all about, help informing the consumer. And I wish the government would step up a bit more to the plate at this point because, electricity is suddenly a scary word. We've all seen our electricity bills jump. We're all worried about that price cap being lifted. But we've calculated that even with the price cap lifting, as and when it does, there will still be a saving on filling your car with electricity rather than filling it with petrol. It's just that saving will be narrowed from something like what we calculate at the moment, which is a saving of about £125 for every 1,000 miles travelled if you drive an electric car over a petrol one. That will narrow to about a saving of £80 for every 1,000 miles travelled, but there's still a saving there. So, and especially, if you get your off-peak energy tariff sorted, all these things help, but the consumer needs a lot of help and information in this direction.
Yeah, quick word, because obviously Auto Traders is, if you want to sell a used car and things, it's always a good place to start. What is happening with those second-hand car prices? Are they likely to stay elevated?
They are likely to say, we've seen a slight softening and we might expect as the cost of living crisis carries on, that softening to continue. But, as you've alluded to, there was a lot of pent-up demand over the past couple of years that still hasn't been satisfied by these supply issues. Supply is now increasing. So more new cars coming onto the market, which pushes more cars into used car brackets. So prices are softening, but no crash in sight. So don't hold off. The purchase of a car is for most people not a discretionary item anyway. Most people do need to replace their car, sort out their next finance deal. So I'd encourage people to do that and not wait for a price crash that isn't going to happen.
OK, Erin Baker, really good to talk to you. Thanks very much indeed. Now, the Welsh First Minister, Mark Drakeford, has been severely criticised, for staying in a 5-star hotel paid for by the Qatar government during a stay at the World Cup. He and the Welsh Economy Minister, Vaughan Gething, stayed at the Ritz-Carlton at the time. Drakeford defended his decision by arguing the people of Wales would have wanted him there, and it gave the opportunity to raise concerns on human rights. The Welsh Government confirmed the Qatar government had paid for hotels and for the First Minister and the Economy Minister, saying they'd visited Qatar to support the Welsh men's football team and discuss trade and investment opportunities. Let's talk to our political reporter, Olivia Utley. There's no getting away from the fact it doesn't smell right.
No, it's quite embarrassing for Mark Drakeford, who is a sort of left of the Labour Party socialist politician. He talks a lot about human rights, LGBT rights, and now it turns out that not just him and Vaughan Gething, but also 4, I think it is, of their officials were also put up in this hotel as guests of the host nation, Qatar. The bill was in excess of £20,000 for the 4 of them. I think it was more like 27,000 when you count in all the flights as well. Of course, it's not just Welsh Labour who've been under scrutiny for accepting gifts from the Qatari government. We know that in 2021, Britain was on the receiving end of more gifts to politicians than any other country in the world, and Conservative politicians have come under fire for it as well, Alan Carnes and David Mundell. But it is particularly embarrassing, I think, for Mark Drakeford, who has pinned himself as this sort of progressive model for politicians in the future, and his claim that the Welsh people would want him to be there. Not quite sure where his evidence is for that.
Well, no, not at the expense of the Qatari government in all of this when you're campaigning for all that. It smacks. It's in much smaller terms, but it still smacks of the criticism that was levelled at David Beckham, doesn't it? You're being paid by a regime that you disagree with.
Absolutely, and I think so many of these public figures who sort of tried to put up a stand and then their stand got weaker and weaker as the World Cup progressed, were sort of hoping that the story would melt away, but now it's come bubbling up again for Mark Drakeford and his officials. I think what's particularly sort of shocking about this particular case is the amount of money that was spent and the amount of luxury that was received. Vaughan Gething and these 4 officials travelled in luxury class, economy, not economy, yeah. Sorry, first class. and were then put up in this very luxury hotel, were treated to dinners, endless cash was essentially splashed on the group. And yeah, it just doesn't sit right at all. And it is completely at odds with the image that Mark Drakeford has tried to put forward of himself. And we know that Drakeford was already becoming pretty unpopular in Wales. He had a very, very bad lockdown. We remember those pictures of book aisles in Welsh supermarkets taped up during lockdown. What he did was pretty extreme, and that lost him some popularity in Wales. And this will definitely hit quite a lot of Welsh people pretty hard.
Yeah, OK. Olivia, thanks very much indeed. If you've got a view on that, particularly if you're in Wales, of course, gbviews at gbnews.uk. Now, to the United States, where Republican Kevin McCarthy has, I mean, it's a historic moment, actually. He's lost 6 rounds of voting for the post of Speaker of the US House of Representatives. Worth putting it into context, normally there is 1 round. That is it. It's all done and dusted. Mr McCarthy is a leading contender to replace Democrat Nancy Pelosi, but he hasn't convinced enough Conservative Republicans to back him. A candidate needs at least 218 votes to be elected Speaker. It is one of the most important jobs in US politics, and congressional business can't begin without one. President Biden is facing a Republican majority in the House for the first time, although Democrats did keep control of the Senate. Let's talk to Sarah Elliott, spokeswoman for Republican Overseas UK. Good to see you this afternoon. I mean, this is a disaster, isn't it? I mean, even President Trump is saying, let's just approve Mr McCarthy.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's definitely illustrative of a divided caucus and a political party that cannot unify behind a consensus candidate. Kevin McCarthy has many detractors in the House. He's more of a moderate member. So those who are on the more conservative side and critical of the war spending in Ukraine have dug their heels in to make a point. But Kevin McCarthy has conceded on many of their demands, and so it just begs the question: when will they compromise? When will they push him over the line? He's also coming in as one of the least popular first-time speakers of the House, which doesn't help him. And it's also, again, illustrated of a very small majority that the Republicans won in the midterms, much smaller than they anticipated. And so this just goes to show that, you know, wrangling these lawmakers, even though you have the majority, will be difficult no matter who is Speaker, because it is such a small majority.
Why is it, though, then, that people like Matt Gaetz, who's, you know, seen very much as being to the right of the party, is an extremely controversial figure, actually, but someone who sort of is very much a Trump supporter, why is he not listening to what Donald Trump is saying?
I think that's a very good question. And I think pundits and observers have all been very interested to see how they have not jumped to the Pied Piper's tune, so to speak. We thought that with Trump's announcement that they would fall in line, as they are loyal Trump followers, and they are still definitely Trump supporters, as Matt Gaetz has said. But it seems to show that maybe Trump doesn't have the sway with his side of the party as much as he used to, and that could be an effect of the midterm elections and how none of his candidates actually won swing and very contested seats. So, you know, the drama of the Republican Party continues to play out while the Democrats enjoy this infighting that is taking place. But we must put it all in context. I think this will be resolved perhaps even today, and it will time will move on, and it's just really more of a management or a bureaucratic process that we're resolving at the moment. It is not an idealism or idealistic schism. I think we have to be very honest about that this is just, you know, party politics and wrangling at the moment. And maybe your British listeners would be able to connect with it better, kind of when the Conservative Party wanted to oust Boris, but there was no true successor to him. And so that process just dragged itself out. And that is kind of what's happening here. Just because McCarthy is there, and he does have experience being a minority leader, and we'll parlay that into majority leader, but, you know, that doesn't mean that there's another guy that is more popular. He's more of the default option.
But it's, as you say, with people over here on this side of the pond with it all, the one message which you hear repeatedly is a divided party doesn't win elections.
this is true, that I think this is just a little growing pains in the early blips of managing a new Congress. I think time will even it out. We will see new leaders step forward, and we definitely have a growing lineup of potential presidential candidates for 2024. So, Democrats shouldn't be too excited by this, and Conservatives and Republicans shouldn't be too distraught by this.
OK, Sarah Elliott, it's good to see you. Thank you. Now, your thoughts on what's happening over here, should we? Caroline's been in touch. Afternoon, Caroline. She just can't believe there's been no mention of the fact that this grown man, Prince Harry we're talking about here, who hurt his back on a doggy bowl was a soldier. Well, to be fair, we have heard that a few times from you. Let's face it, wonder what his protection costs were when serving in Afghanistan. A Marine? Don't think so. Well, he's Blues and Royals, wasn't he? I don't know quite what his position was when he was out there. But anyway, even so, no, I mean, it does raise a few questions. Danny says, I'm sure you're aware, if the assault is as Harry has alleged, it's a criminal, not a civil offence. So it follows the Metropolitan Police must interview Harry and his brother, and that must include Harry and Meghan, as she was shown the injury. Oh dear, it all gets very controversial, doesn't it? Anyway, keep your thoughts coming through, and we're back with all the top stories in just a moment.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Deebs & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Stein. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
Why not take us home with you by visiting the GB News shop at gbnews.store. You'll find all the official merchandise, a really good present actually for yourself, your friends or your family.
We ship across the UK mainland at no extra cost. GB News, the People's Channel.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
There's a guy who went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
It's 2 o'clock. Very good afternoon to you. This is GB News Live. Here's what's coming up in the next hour. Explosive new claims from Prince Harry this afternoon. An interview with an American broadcaster reveals he calls Prince William his arch nemesis, with allegations reported earlier in The Guardian that William hit him. The Sun is claiming the two brothers begged their father not to marry Camilla. We'll bring you the very latest with our royal reporter here in the studio. Sir Keir Starmer has set out his political vision for Britain, saying 2023 would mark a new chapter for the country and it needs change and national renewal. He also sought to distance himself from the party's previous leader, Jeremy Corbyn, highlighting changes have been made under his watch, including on NATO, national security and anti-Semitism. And, of course, more strikes. Despite the RMT ending their 48-hour walkout, ASLEF members are striking today. We'll hear from a small business which says it's losing £2,000 a day as a result. And as Downing Street releases a photo of the PM preparing for his speech yesterday, some eagle-eyed people spotted a mug sporting a photo of Southampton football legend Laurie McMenemy. He'll speak to the former Saints manager himself. So, do get in touch. We'd love to hear from you on whatever you think about today's stories. gbviews@gbnews.uk. Before all that, though, Rhiannon's got the latest headlines.
Thank you, Stephen. Good afternoon. It's 2 minutes past 2. Your top stories from the GB Newsroom. Sir Keir Starmer's promised a decade of national renewal if Labour comes to power. In his first speech of the new year, the Labour leader set out his plans to modernise central government, a day after Rishi Sunak outlined his 5 promises. Sir Keir claimed the Prime Minister doesn't have the solutions to the country's problems.
You saw it yesterday from the Prime Minister. Commentary without solution. More promises, more platitudes. No ambition to take us forward. No sense of what the country needs. 13 years of nothing but sticking plaster politics. It's why every crisis hits Britain harder than our competitors. The only country in the G7 still poorer than it was before the pandemic. The worst decade for growth in 2 centuries. 7 million on waiting lists and rising.
James Cleverly, meanwhile, says Labour has worked against finding solutions.
They've opposed our desire to bring in limitations on the abuse of unions, which are causing strikes that are hurting ordinary working families. He stood against our attempts to control illegal migration and get a grip of those people smuggling gangs. All the things that we've tried to do to bring real change, positive change to this country, the Labour Party have opposed time and time again, and all we saw in that speech was the same old from Labour.
Prince Harry reportedly claims he was attacked by his brother over his marriage to Meghan Markle in his autobiography Spare. A leaked extract published in The Guardian alleges Prince William grabbed Harry by the collar and knocked him to the floor in 2019, leaving him with a visible injury to his back. Harry also claims William called Meghan difficult, rude and abrasive. It's also been revealed the Duke of Sussex refers to his brother as his arch nemesis in the memoir. Buckingham Palace has declined to comment. Up to 60,000 mourners are thought to have gathered in St Peter's Square at the Vatican this morning for the funeral of former Pope Benedict XVI. The Mass was led by Pope Francis. It's the first time in 600 years that the current Pope has buried his predecessor. Benedict XVI is being laid to rest in a crypt beneath St Peter's Basilica, according to his wishes. The government's decided it won't go ahead with a plan to privatise Channel 4. The idea to sell the broadcaster was announced during Boris Johnson's government. Former Culture Secretary Nadine Dorries said government ownership was holding the channel back, but her successor, Michelle Donnellan, has decided the broadcaster shouldn't be sold. She's instead proposed other reforms, including greater commercial flexibility. ASLEF says further strikes are inevitable unless there's a breakthrough in the long-running row over pay. It's the 3rd consecutive day of rail disruption across the UK, and it's even worse today, with drivers from 15 different companies now on strike. Some areas have no trains running at all. ASLEF's General Secretary Mick Whelan told us union members won't back down.
I'm always hopeful, but the longer it goes on, the problems get greater. When we first started talking, inflation was 5.2%. It went to 14% last year. So 14% last year and in double digits this year. Effectively, over the 4 years, my members have seen a 25% cut in their living standards, as have many other workers. How long can that go on for?
New car sales have sunk to their lowest level in 30 years. Preliminary data shows that around 1.6 million were registered here in the UK last year, a quarter below pre-COVID levels. Supply shortages of items such as semiconductors are being blamed, driven by coronavirus lockdowns in China. Electric cars, though, made up 23% of all newly registered vehicles. And a British tourist has been shot dead in Jamaica in what police there think may have been a contract killing ordered here in the UK. 33-year-old Sean Patterson from West London was shot multiple times by the pool of his holiday villa in St James. The personal trainer was on his first visit to the island to meet his father. Jamaican police say one man's been taken into custody as they continue to work on the case with UK authorities. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens now, though. It's back to GB News Live with Stephen.
Rhiannon, thank you. It's 7 minutes past 2. Now, Prince Harry's new book appears to have been published early in Spain, by mistake, so it would seem, and The Sun is reporting that he and Prince William begged their father not to marry Camilla, and they feared she would be their wicked stepmother. It's the latest broadside on the royal family after leaks published this morning in which Harry claimed he was physically attacked by his brother, falling to the floor and landing on his back, all over his marriage to Meghan Markle, of course. Now, despite a huge operation to prevent a book leak, The Guardian and The Sun have both got themselves copies and are so scooping the world. Harry has also claimed William called Meghan Markle difficult, rude and abrasive, with King Charles asking the two boys not to make his final years a misery. Buckingham Palace isn't commenting, no surprise there, but Harry has been giving a round of media interviews, and a new clip with the US broadcaster Good Morning America has been released within the last hour.
In this book, where you refer to your brother as your beloved brother and arch nemesis. Strong words. What did you mean by that?
There has always been this competition between us, weirdly. I think it really plays into, or is played by, the heir spare.
Well, let's talk to our royal reporter, Cameron Walker, who's here in the studio. Arch nemesis. I mean, good grief.
Pretty strong words, talking about this competition which Prince Harry feels he's always had with his brother William. I mean, the title of his book is Spare, referring to himself as the spare part, perhaps, if something happens to William and he could not take up his duties as king. But it's just the latest, isn't it, Stephen? We've had a lot of information today from various sources, but it all comes back to Prince Harry's memoir. So this is the third promotional interview he's done for his new book, which is being published on January 10th in everywhere apart from Spain, who accidentally published it today, which is how we think the Sun newspaper got the information about the new claims, which is that Prince Harry and William both fears that Camilla would become their wicked stepmother just before their first meeting with her. Prince Harry also claims that him and William were happy for Camilla to be part of the family because they could see how happy she made their father Charles, but they begged Charles not to marry her. This is pretty damning stuff, and we've been told all along, really. There's been with being alluded to the fact that King Charles's red line is Camilla, and it appears Harry has crossed that line.
Which could mean what?
Well, perhaps a slightly stronger response from Buckingham Palace. We'll have to wait and see. At the moment, Buckingham Palace has not commented. They don't plan to comment, neither does Kensington Palace as well. We've talked about the fact that previously that their strategy of never complain, never explain appears to be working because the opinion polls are still very much in the royal family's favour. I think there's a lot of noise which is going to happen between now and the book's release date, but because it's been released early in Spain, Stephen, it wouldn't surprise me if we get more leaks coming out before that January 10th date.
In terms of the Camilla issue, because I think this is, as you say, it's very problematic. She is now queen. And as you say, a red line for the king, understandably so. Is there a danger of taking this out of context a little bit, in the sense that if these were comments made before they really knew her, certainly before they were married, and they were comparatively young then, I mean, clearly opinions, there's always difficulty when a parent gets married again, isn't
Yes.
there? So perhaps, are we taking it out of some sort of context?
We have to remember that the whole of Spare is documenting Harry's life. So he talks about his childhood, going into the army, Afghanistan, his courtship with Meghan and eventual subsequent marriage. So the point in which he is referring to in this particular section would have happened some point before 2005, which is when Charles and Camilla were married. Back then, opinion of Camilla, now Queen Consort, wasn't as favourable as it is now. Camilla has really proved herself in the eyes of the public. We can see that from opinion polls as our Queen Consort, and so much so that the late Queen used her Accession Day message in February 2022, it seems such a long time ago now, nearly a year, where she said it was her express wish that Camilla would one day be known as Queen Consort. Well, if it has Queen Elizabeth II's seal of approval, then it has the country's, I think, quite frankly. So I think the fact that Harry's kind of bringing up old history, which clearly isn't really relevant today, is potentially problematic.
There are going to be a lot of people watching and listening right now, and perhaps people in the palace as well, who are thinking, it's time, this is just a step too far. Time to remove the titles. Could that happen? I mean, without sort of responding officially, if you like, because the palace is keeping quiet, and perhaps rightly so. But actually, are they heading towards a point where they're going to say, well, you're not working royals, you're attacking the royal family, it's time to be not royal at all?
Well, the King doesn't have that power to remove the titles from Harry and Meghan. Only an Act of Parliament can do that. So there's the 1917 Titles Deprivation Act, which came in during the First World War to remove titles from German princes, because clearly Great Britain was at war with Germany at the time. So it would need an amendment to that. There is, I think, a private member's bill going through Parliament at the moment to give the monarch, the King, more powers in order to remove the titles, or at least a parliamentary committee the power to remove the titles from them. But as it stands, it would need a change in Parliament, and our MPs would have to vote on whether or not to give the King powers to remove Harry and Meghan's titles of a Duke and Duchess of Sussex.
OK. Cameron, for now, thanks very much indeed. Let's talk to royal commentator Jenny Bond, who joins us now. Jenny, I've got to be perfectly honest, I just feel so sad. With every new bit of information that comes out, I just feel sadder to hear what is being said about the royal family, to be honest.
Yeah, it's hideous to watch the breakup of this family drama. And it's incredibly sad to have the image of Prince Charles as he then was, and Harry reveals that at the funeral of the Duke of Edinburgh, Charles turned to his two sons, looked up at them because he's smaller than them, and said, "Boys, please don't make my final years a misery." And that's what they're doing. You would have thought that would have actually halted Harry in his tracks, and he might have thought better than release all that he's releasing. I mean, I knew the book was coming out. I had no idea there were going to be 3 major interviews going alongside it. And I do think we're entering, as Cameron suggested, quite dangerous territory now when Camilla's name is being drawn in. It's one thing for boys to have some resentment towards a new mother, stepmother, wicked stepmother coming into their lives. I can get that. But according to these reports emanating from Spain, now the Sun, Harry says that Camilla, he's accusing her of leaking stories about her first meeting with William, and describing Harry's first meeting with Camilla like waiting for an injection, and they talked about horses. Now, this is difficult territory, and it's going to be hard for Charles to hear and not respond in some way, albeit maybe privately.
Yeah, I was going to say, we're not going to see any public response to this, are we? I mean, it would seem that the strategy, which has long been in place of saying nothing at all, has got to be the best one. I mean, it is tomorrow's chip paper, isn't it?
It is the best strategy, though. But, William does not come out of this well. There clearly was fisticuffs between a couple of grown men in the kitchen of Nottingham Cottage. I mean, it's almost laughable, isn't it? William hitting Harry or knocking him to the floor and then saying, come on, hit me back. I mean, it's ridiculous, isn't it? But I think that these private conversations and events that are being leaked now by Harry are going to make it almost impossible for any reconciliation in the near future. And we have Harry now saying in the latest trailer that he doesn't know if he'll come to the coronation of his father. You know, this is about Charles. It's not about Harry, but he doesn't know if he can come, and that the ball is in their court, the family's court over here. I don't think that's the case. I think the ball is very much in Harry's court, and he should, if he really wants his brother back and his father back, get on a plane, come over here, find where his dad is. It's not difficult for him to know where his dad is. Knock on the door and give him a great big hug and say, God, you know, I'm really sorry. What a mess.
Yeah, but he does, as you say, he doesn't seem to want to do that. And as Rafael Del Magku mentioned in the last hour, and it's a really valid point, actually, I'd not thought of it. The idea that in all of this, in Netflix, the Netflix docuseries, in these interviews, and it would seem in the book as well, that there's absolutely no acknowledgement that Harry and Meghan could themselves have done anything wrong at all. It was that they're painting themselves as absolutely innocent victims in all of this. Well, I mean, realistically, that's not how life works, is it?
I know. Well, we know Meghan has said publicly that she feels she did everything she possibly could to fit in. And she says that, you know, when they flew back to Canada, first of all, one of the crew on the aircraft came over to her and said, thank you for all you have done, you know. Yeah, they will not take responsibility for any blame, it seems, and there must be blame on both sides. I mean, what provoked William in that altercation in the kitchen? Why did he knock Harry to the ground? What did Harry say? Did Harry say anything? He must have said something. They were trading insults, I think. And they've said they were exchanging insults. Harry has said they were exchanging insults, probably about their wives. So you've got William saying, oh, Meghan, she's abrasive, she's rude. So Harry probably said something about Catherine. And then we get the fisticuffs. It's so immature.
Yeah, it's not something you want to hear. Just a quick one. Do you think, despite the fact that, you know, this doesn't paint a nice picture of William, if we believe everything that Harry is saying, though it is, you know, as I say, a bit out of context in a sense, does it actually do him any long-term harm? Because his popularity seems to be as high as ever.
Yeah, I mean, William does not come out of this well. We know he's hot-tempered, as his father is. We saw that with the leaking pens, didn't we? They both got a temper, and clearly William's temper got the better of him. He doesn't come out of it well. And I do think you were asking, would there be any response? If there were to be any kind of public response, I think it would come from William, and I think he would be provoked again into doing that. If people like me were out at an event where William is the next few days, and we fire questions at him, you know, did you hit your brother? Did you say it would be quite fun to wear a Nazi uniform? He might be provoked in some kind of response then. But I think the strategy, the plan, is to rise above it.
Yeah, well, let's hope they do. Jenny, good to see you. Thanks very much indeed. Your thoughts on that, because I know that's what you've been emailing in about this afternoon. gbviews@gbnews.uk. Coming up, we're going to be reviewing Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer's speech from earlier today as he promises a decade of national renewal. Before all that, it's time for a short break.
Hello, I'm Alex Deakin, and this is your latest weather update from the Met Office. A fairly drab day out there. Lots of cloud, but it is pretty mild. Most places dry, but there is some rain around, courtesy of this area of low pressure, which is also increasing the winds, particularly these tightly packed isobars come into northwest Scotland tonight. But through the day, we've got these weather fronts straddling the country. They are bringing some light rain and drizzle over northern England. It is turning a bit wetter this afternoon over western parts of Scotland, and a bit of rain for Northern Ireland. For the bulk of England and Wales, there are just a few light showers here and there. Many places will just stay dry, but predominantly cloudy. Not much sunshine around today. Despite that lack of sun, it is very mild. Temperatures getting into the teens, 12, 13, perhaps even 14 in one or two spots. A little cooler further north, but still temperatures above average. This rain will sink south overnight, and the winds will really pick up across the far northwest. A very blustery night for the Western Isles and northern parts of the mainland of Scotland. That rain slinking south across England and Wales does move through fairly quickly. Clear skies following and slightly cooler air following as well, but still most places avoiding of frost, generally in towns and cities several degrees above freezing to start Friday. And for most Fridays, a fine day. Some early rain across Kent. There will be plenty of showers coming in across Scotland, where it will remain blustery, but most of those by the afternoon confined to the Highlands, the Northern Isles and the Western Isles. A bit more cloud for Northern England, North Wales, and there could be some showery rain here through the afternoon, but
say most places dry and bright. Still mild for the time of year, but lower temperatures compared to today, but still getting up to 11, maybe 12 Celsius across parts of the south. Staying generally fine on Friday evening, but increasingly you will see showers into the southwest. And look at this big bank of rain moving in. That is a weather front that's going to sweep across the country on Friday night and Saturday, bringing us all a spell of rain. That'll be followed by blustery showers on Saturday afternoon, and then more showers on Sunday, turning a little cooler into next week.
I'm Camilla Tominey. Join me on GB News on Sunday mornings for a politics show with personality on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8".
My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here. You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing! You see, amazing! You remind me of me in the European Parliament.
But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
It's 2:24. Now, earlier today, this morning, the Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer set out his political vision for Britain, saying 2023 would mark a new chapter for the country and that it needs change and national renewal. He didn't hold back at criticising the Tories' record on economic growth either. Let's have a listen to some of the key moments from his speech.
You saw it yesterday from the Prime Minister. Commentary without solution. More promises, more platitudes. No ambition to take us forward. No sense of what the country needs. 13 years of nothing but sticking plaster politics. It's why every crisis hits Britain harder than our competitors. The only country in the G7 still poorer than it was before the pandemic. The worst decade for growth in 2 centuries. 7 million on waiting lists and rising. That hasn't happened elsewhere. So this year, in place of sticking plaster politics, we'll set out the case for change, the case for a new Britain, the case for hope, that the country will get better, that politics can be a force for good, that Britain can be run in the interests of working people. We can feel the public looking at us again, and we won't let up. We'll work every day to earn their trust, show them a new way of governing, and lead them to the fairer, greener, more dynamic Britain where aspiration is rewarded, working people succeed, communities control their own destiny, and where politics doesn't hide from the big challenges that face our children. Thank you very much.
Well, let's talk to our political correspondent, Tom Harwood, who's here. What do you reckon, Tom?
Well, it was a big play, it was a big picture pitch. It was trying to display the sort of values a Labour government would have if it were so successful as to win an election and overturn that historic majority that the Conservatives won back in 2019. It was talking about rebuilding Britain, about clean, renewable energy, about devolving power, about being fiscally responsible, all of these key strands to this vision. What it was lacking, however, was this sense of detail. It was interesting and perhaps slightly ironic that Sir Keir Starmer there in that speech was criticising the way that Westminster works, called it a talking shop, said he'd only been personally in politics for 8 years and wanted to change the way things were done. But then when it came to the specifics, his speech to some extent sounded a bit like a talking shop. It was that big picture policy prospectus rather than the detail that people need to see. He spoke, for example, about planning reform, but he didn't talk about how he would deliver it or what that would involve. He spoke about renewable energy, and we've heard a little bit about Labour's policy towards that, but we haven't seen the nuts and bolts, we haven't seen the costings, and clearly when it comes to this overall picture, Sir Keir Starmer is still sitting in this vague area. Perhaps he doesn't want to be scrutinised on the specifics this far out of an election.
And nothing that I remember him saying on immigration.
No, this has been a point of debate for the Labour Party. They've been really straddling various positions on this issue. The Shadow Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper, has been talking for some time about the need for more caseworkers and more funding into speeding up asylum claims within this country. That's something that the government has committed to do as well. But when it comes to actually policies about those boats, the Labour Party is very hard to pin down on what specific policies they would go for. It's an uncomfortable area for them because, of course, there are many people within the Labour Party, albeit on the back benches, who take a much more pro-asylum seeker position, who take a view that people should be brought into this country and housed rather than those that come from safe countries may well be turned back.
I don't know if I'm being really stupid, Tom. It wouldn't be the first time, let's be honest. You said 2023 is going to be a new chapter. Why does the Labour Party think 2023 is going to be a new chapter? Because they're not going to get into power in 2023.
No, they're not. There's not going to be an election this year. The most likely time for an election is going to be the spring of the year after 2024, perhaps May. The latest the election could possibly be is actually the end of January 2025, which would be a 5-year parliament plus the election campaign off the back of the last election. But it's interesting, both parties, the Conservative Party and the Labour Party, are seeing 2023 as this time of renewal. We're going to, of course, see the coronation of our new king this year. We've seen the back of the pandemic. Inflation is expected to come down this year as well. The worst of the economic turmoil caused by the aftershocks of COVID and the war in Ukraine seem to be potentially entering the rearview mirror. And so both the Conservative Party and the Labour Party, in Rishi Sunak's speech yesterday and Sir Keir Starmer's speech today, want to be talking about what they're going to be doing for the next year, potentially. What we have seen over these last 2 days is the beginning of a very, very long election campaign.
We're going to be fed up with it before too long, aren't we? Tom, thanks very much indeed. Loads of you getting in touch this afternoon. As always, thank you very much indeed. Let's see what some of you are saying. Start with Kathleen. Hi, Kathleen. She says, can anyone take Prince Harry seriously now? He was in the army and he's crying like a baby that his brother hit him. This is all PR for his book. It's very sad to see him humiliate himself in such a ridiculously contradictory way. We were talking about cars earlier on. The figures down, new car sales last year, a 30-year low. Not by much, though. And they're expecting a big hike, 15% up next year. And sales of electric cars have actually increased 23%, beating diesel cars for the first time in the last year. On electric vehicles, Phil says, who can afford to buy a new car when we're in a recession? Electric cars are supposed to be the future, but nobody knows what will happen with them in the future because they might need a new battery costing thousands of pounds. There'll never be enough charging points with all back-to-back terrace houses and no driveways. There are logistical issues with all of that, but let's hope that they do get across them. That's what we want to see, don't we? Because we are going to all have to go electric eventually, and they are meant to be very good. I've not got one, but they are meant to be very good, Phil. But, you know, there are issues to be solved. Back to Harry. Anne, hi Anne, says we should thank our lucky stars that Harry is the spare and not the heir. I know what you mean. I know where you're coming from, but if he was the heir, he'd be a whole different person, wouldn't he? He'd be a different man, I should think. But anyway, keep your thoughts coming through. gbviews@gbnews.uk. Coming up, we've got the latest advice on a new sub-variant of COVID nicknamed the Kraken, which sounds very ominous. It's made its way over from the United States, where cases are soaring. We'll find out more after the news with Rihanna.
Stephen, thank you. 2:32, your top stories from the GB Newsroom. Sir Keir Starmer's promised a decade of national renewal if Labour comes to power. In his first speech of the new year, the Labour leader set out plans to modernise central government. He also claimed the Prime Minister has no ambition for the future.
You saw it yesterday from the Prime Minister. Commentary without solution. More promises, more platitudes. No ambition to take us forward. No sense of what the country needs. 13 years of nothing but sticking plaster politics. It's why every crisis hits Britain harder than our competitors. The only country in the G7 still poorer than it was before the pandemic. The worst decade for growth in 2 centuries. 7 million on waiting lists and rising.
Foreign Secretary James Cleverly, meanwhile, says Labour has worked against finding solutions.
They've opposed our desire to bring in limitations on the abuse of unions, which causing strikes that are hurting ordinary working families. He stood against our attempts to control illegal migration and get a grip of those people smuggling gangs. All the things that we've tried to do to bring real change, positive change to this country, the Labour Party have opposed time and time again, and all we saw in that speech was the same old from Labour.
Prince Harry reportedly claims in his autobiography Spare that he was attacked by his brother over his marriage to Meghan Markle. A leaked extract published in The Guardian alleges Prince William grabbed Harry and knocked him to the floor in 2019. It's also been revealed the Duke of Sussex refers to his brother in the book as his arch-nemesis. Buckingham Palace has declined to comment. And ASLEF says further strikes are inevitable unless there's a breakthrough in the long-running row over pay. It's the 3rd consecutive day of rail disruption across the UK, with drivers from 15 different companies now on strike. Some areas have no trains at all running. TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News. Don't go anywhere. GB News Live with Stephen will be back in just a moment.
I'm Mark Dolan. Join me at 11 on GB News for Headliners, in which I'll be joined by 2 of the UK's top comedians discussing tomorrow's papers. If it's an important story, we'll cover it, but we'll have some fun along the way. Headliners, the late-night paper review that won't send you to sleep like the others will. 7 nights a week at 11 p.m. on GB News.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512,
Virgin Media Channel 604,
Freesat Channel 216,
Freeview Channel 236,
and YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB+ radio,
with the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere. Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's 2:36 now. This isn't happy news, I'm afraid. A new sub-variant of Omicron has been detected in the UK. It's been nicknamed the Kraken and is thought to be responsible for a rapid increase in COVID cases over in the United States. The sub-variant makes up about 4% of cases in the UK already. It's caused concern in the US, where figures are as high as 40%. Now, virus experts have warned they expect the Kraken to take off in the UK, but despite the scary name, it is still a sub-variant of Omicron, which is a relatively known quantity. What is potentially of greater interest is that from today, for the first time in a year, COVID travel restrictions are reinstated. Anyone travelling from mainland China over the age of 12 will need to take a COVID test no more than 2 days before travel. So how worried should we be about a new unknown super variant of COVID making its way to the UK? Well, one person to ask is virologist Professor Hugh Pennington, who thankfully knows all about this sort of thing. Good to see you, Professor Pennington. Should we be concerned about this? I mean, new variants we know are inevitable. Is this one causing us any particular concern?
No particular concern. Omicron is milder in terms of, what it does to people than all the previous variants. And that's because Omicron specialized in growing in the nose rather than getting down into the lungs. It uses different enzymes as part of its metabolism, as it were. Well, it uses host enzymes and so on. But anyway, won't go into the details, but Omicron is milder than all the previous variants. And, so there's a new variant of Omicron shouldn't be causing any particular concern at all. What Omicron does, how it's evolved to become more transmissible. It gets about more easily, and that's clearly why the Kraken, the XBB variant, as it's called, is doing so well in the US. And it'll do quite well here. Most people who get it will have a mild illness. Many of them won't even know they've been infected. You just grow in your nose, it won't cause any symptoms at all. So I don't think there's any need for any particular concern. And we have a very good system in the UK for monitoring all these variants and working out whether they're actually going to be variants of concern, whether they're going to cause more serious ill health in the risk groups. And so I think we should really, take that on board. We have a very good system for monitoring variants in the UK, and there's no cause for concern at the moment.
In terms of our system, is it right, do you think, that we have implemented these travel restrictions on people coming in from mainland China, reintroducing testing before travel and what have you? I mean, I know there is a huge increase in numbers in China for reasons that are very different to the situation here in the UK, but people are coming to a country where there are, 1 million cases of COVID here in the UK. Do these restrictions make any sense scientifically?
Not really. The most important thing to do with people coming from China is to check a proportion of them, not all of them, but to check a proportion of them to make sure that they're not infected with another variant. Now, there's no particular reason why China should be evolving more and nastier variants than anywhere else in the world. But of course, the population of China is very large, and the virus has taken off there because a lot of the people in China either have had no vaccination at all or rather poor vaccines, and many of them, of course, haven't been exposed to COVID like many of us here in the UK. So, but having said that, we are monitoring people coming from China anyway, and the travel restrictions, it's about 10% public health and 90% politics.
Yeah, which is interesting. In terms of that, there's a lot of concern over the fact that China isn't being transparent with its figure. I mean, certainly when it comes to death figures from COVID. I mean, the WHO is very concerned with what is being released to the public on that. Does that matter? I mean, from a scientific point of view, how important is it to know what is going on in China, where there are something upwards of 1 billion cases?
Well, yes, it's important for the rest of the world to know. And part of the reason, of course, is if a new variant appeared that just happened to be nastier, clearly we might get some evidence of that from the mortality figures in China. But the mortality figures in China, I'm afraid, are probably going to be high because the main risk group of people who are likely to die from COVID are the elderly. And the elderly in China have been not very keen on taking up the vaccine there, unlike the elderly in the UK and many other countries. Here, people have really been very keen to take up the vaccine, which has got very good results. It protects them and, the community at large, but particularly the elderly. In China, the elderly very poorly immunized against the virus in terms of having active immunization. So it's a very sad situation for China. Having important data is clearly something that tells you what's going on. But at the end of the day, what the Chinese have done, they put really rather stringent restrictions on how they classify people who've had COVID and died from it. And in this country, for example, we have a very broad definition. Now, if you die in hospital and you've got a positive COVID test, you score as though you have been killed by the COVID. That's not the case in China. And I think that's one of the reasons why the World Health Organization is not concerned, but worried in the sense that the Chinese statistics are not particularly comparable with those in other countries. It'll all come out in the wash at the end of the day. It'll all come out in the wash. And unfortunately, the number of deaths in China is not something that we should be concerned about unless we have Chinese relatives.
Yeah, fair point. Professor Pennington, as always, pleasure to talk to you. Thank you. Alleviate your worries a little bit if you had worries over that. Professor Pennington is a man who speaks sense, and keep calm and carry on seems to be the message, really, for the time being anyway. Now, new car sales have fallen to their lowest level in 30 years. About 1.6 million new cars registered during 2022. That's according to the Society of Motor Manufacturers and Traders. It's 2% down on 2021, 20% below pre-pandemic levels. Let's get the latest from our economics and business editor, Liam Halligan, who's on the money. So, Liam, why are the figures so low?
They're low for the year as a whole because we've got ongoing supply chain issues, Stephen, still related to that ghastly COVID lockdown, which, of course, was across the world. It's led to a shortage of semiconductors, vital in cars, a shortage of sheet-rolled steel, all kinds of other components. And that means that new cars registered last year were at a 30-year low, as you said, because there was so much pent-up demand for cars. The cars weren't actually delivered. Having said that, there is a bit of a chink a chink of light, if you like, because even though for the year as a whole, new car sales were down by 2%, if you take December 2022 and compare it to December 2021, December 2022, new car registrations were 18% up on December 2021. So clearly we're starting to recover. And actually, believe it or not, the car industry itself thinks there are going to be really big sales, certainly an increase from where we are this year, 2023. That was the message from Mike Hawes when I spoke to him earlier, and he is from the Society of Motor Manufacturers and Traders. Here he is.
2023, we're actually forecasting an uplift, maybe 15%. So we're going to look counter-cyclical. Yes, the economic challenges everyone faces are severe. But most people buy a new car on a form of finance, which fixes in a cost for 3 or 4 years. And if the cost of running that new vehicle is cheaper than the one you already own, it can be advantageous to a household income.
I mean, it's very nice to have a positive outlook.
It is. It is.
In all of this. But what have we actually seen in the last 12 months in terms of the types of vehicles that are being sold?
Well, that positive outlook and the types of vehicles, they're kind of related. Let me explain. What Mike Hawes was saying there is that because there's so much pent-up demand and because it's actually sometimes cheaper to run a new car than an old banger, if you like, a lot of people will be replacing their cars this year. He expects a 15% uplift. And he's not just saying that. That's based on the trend that we saw towards the end of last year. And we're seeing particularly fast growth in those EVs, those electric vehicles and hybrids and so on. Let's have a look at some of the numbers. You break down the SMMT fine print published today. So petrol cars were still the majority, 55.9% of all car sales, new car sales in 2022. And look at diesel, Stephen, just 9.6%. It wasn't so many years ago, diesel was half of all new cars and vans and trucks sold. Then you had that scandal, that VW scandal in 2015, and diesel went from being seen as more environmentally friendly than less environmentally friendly than petrol. A lot of us got left with diesel cars, didn't we? Electric is 16.6% of new car sales in 2022, more, Stephen, than diesel for the first time ever, really racing ahead of diesel as diesel fell. And then you've got hybrids at 11.6% of all new cars. And eagle-eyed viewers and listeners will know that doesn't add up to 100. The others are things like plug-in hybrids, so hybrids that are electric but also have a petrol engine and then a battery on board, and the petrol engine kind of tops up the battery, if you like. So lots and lots of different variants. And I think new car sales will increase, not just because of pent-up demand, but also because, as we were saying in the last hour, Stephen, we're approaching that 2030 deadline, which the government says will happen and Labour says will happen, we'll see. But when sales of new petrol and diesel cars actually are outlawed here in the UK. So you're seeing the shift, the transition to electric and plug-in hybrid and other forms of hybrid. And I think that will keep new car sales relatively buoyant in the months and years ahead.
But what is going to be important for that, of course, is infrastructure, which is going to involve a lot of capital spend from somebody, isn't it?
That's right. We heard from Auto Trader earlier during your programme, very knowledgeable, and Auto Trader was saying the government is, and fuel companies between them, it's a kind of joint effort, they're building new places where you can recharge your electric car at a rate of 27 a day at the moment. And if they're going to fulfil what the motor industry thinks they need to fulfil in order to make the transition, it should be more like 200 per day. Yeah. There is still a lot of range anxiety out there. I think the range anxiety has kind of shifted. It used to be about, oh, will my electric car conk out altogether and I'll be left by the side of the road. It's now shifted to, I know my electric car will get me to the next charging point, but how long will I have to wait there? But even though it only takes 10, 15 minutes to charge, we'll have to wait 2 hours to plug the thing in because there aren't enough charging points. You know, you can have a cup of coffee, but if you had an extra 2 hours to your journey because you've got to recharge. So I think range anxiety is shifting from a technological anxiety to an infrastructure anxiety, as you say. I think the other interesting thing that we're hearing from the motor industry today, as these SMMT figures are published, is that market for used cars. Now, during lockdown, where there was this pent-up demand for new cars, you know, nearly new cars, very high-quality used cars, they became almost as expensive as new cars, and there's still quite a lot of juice in that market. But I don't think there's going to be a sort of immediate collapse in the sale of, in the price of second-hand cars as more new cars come onto the market as these supply chains issues ease. All in all, this is a story not just about possibly buoyant car sales here in the UK in 2023, and we still make a lot of the cars that we buy, obviously. It's also a story, Stephen, about the lingering tail effects of lockdown. You know, it's over a year now since lockdown ended, pretty much around the world, though, of course, China has been going in and out of lockdown. and still global manufacturing is yet to fully recover.
Yeah, no, very fair point. Liam, thanks very much indeed. Now, it's the third day of the current 5-day rail strike following the end of the 48-hour walkout by RMT members last night. Today, ASLEF are taking industrial action. Now, they represent train drivers in many companies, and it means some rail companies are running no services at all today. Rail links to the UK's two busiest airports will be cut, with Gatwick Express and Heathrow Express closed down as well. Now, it affects us if you're trying to get to work or just get about your ordinary business. What about if you're running a business in all of this? What impact does it have? Well, let's talk to Gus Golding, Operations Manager at Woolfox Coffee Roasters in Brighton. Really good to see you. Are you seeing a direct impact on your business from these strikes?
Yeah, it's quite significant. I mean, we've got one site in particular that's based within Brighton Station, and we see sales have dipped probably between 80 and 90% on the actual strike days. So that's seen a significant impact. It's affecting our staff quite a lot as well, because we're having to reduce their hours without much notice. And then even our other sites that aren't based within the station, we're seeing a bit of a decrease as well, just on footfall around Brighton in total, because there's a lot of tourist trade that comes down from London here and stuff, so yeah.
I mean, so on top of what has no doubt been a difficult few years for you, as it has been for just about every business across the country, this is a further blow. Can you make your way through this while we wait and hopefully get all this resolved?
Yeah, I mean, Woolfox as a company, we should be fine. I mean, we're quite self-sufficient. We roast our own coffee, we brew our own beers, we bake our own bread. So we keep a lot, we have our own ecosystem within Brighton, so we'll be fine. But I do know a lot of other places within the city that are closing. I don't know how much of a direct correlation it has to the train strikes, but I do know it's having a significant impact, especially over Christmas in the retail trade.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, isn't it, when you're reliant on the rails in a way that your business is, but then also there's issues, and I don't know what you use in terms of shipping things about, but I mean, certainly a lot of companies are really struggling with the Royal Mail strike as well. It almost seems a bit of a perfect storm.
Yeah, we roast our own coffee, so we ship that nationwide, and we've had quite a lot of issues with our shipping because of the Royal Mail strikes as well. A lot of delays, a lot of issues, a lot of refunds to be issued. So, yeah, that is another impact. But once again, I mean, after COVID, we became quite flexible, quite resilient. So we learned how to deal with these stresses a lot better than we would have done maybe 2-3 years ago.
But what you've got to be, I suppose one of the concerns is customer base, isn't it? If you're having problems either producing the product or problems getting a product out to people, then a loyal customer base can quite quickly dwindle.
Yeah, I mean, we're quite fortunate. Most of our customers are based locally, but we do, as I said, some of our stores, we do rely on more of a tourist trade. So that has an impact there, but we're fortunate within Brighton and Hove. We've got a really good reputation and a really loyal, fantastic customer base.
I mean, it's interesting because a place like Brighton and Hove, obviously, is a lot of people live in the city but have key links to London. I mean, transport to London is a key part of what goes on in Brighton, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we have a restaurant up in London, and we've not been there for the past 2 weeks because of this. We were planning on actually going tomorrow, so we were unable to go. So it does have a significant impact on working, commuting between the two cities because it's such a vital link. It's 50 minutes you're there, so yeah.
Yeah. Oh, well, look, let's hope that you manage to get through this in the way. You put me in the mood for a decent cup of coffee, Gus, I'll tell you that for nothing.
Come down to Brighton, get you sorted out.
I will, but I'll have to drive. Really good to see you. Thank you very much indeed. Oh, now, freshly brewed cup of coffee, decent coffee beans. What's not to love about that, eh? Loads of you getting in touch this afternoon. Thank you for all your correspondence. A lot about Harry. The latest bits and bobs about Harry have come out. There's been yet another interview that has been released. The book, of course, is all about promoting the book. There's been some extracts from the book which have been sneaked out, partly because it's gone on sale in Spain by mistake. They've released it 5 days early, so everyone's grabbing a copy in Spain and busily translating it into English for us poor souls over here. Jill has been in touch. Hi, Jill. She says what Harry and Meghan have done, disclosing private matters to the press, is 1,000 times worse than what Meghan's father did, but they're not willing to forgive him. Rani says, I think Prince Harry and his wife have behaved in an appalling manner since they announced they were leaving the firm. I think Harry needs help urgently. Every time he makes new accusations, they get wilder and wilder. What worries me is the line of succession. If anything happened to the Prince of Wales and his family, currently we would have King Harry. Well, yes, we would. That's it for GB News Live today. Mark Longhurst is still working on his tan, so I'm back same time next week. See you then.
I'm Alex Deakin, and this is your latest weather update.